Hey everybody, Noah here from Midwestern Marks, and today we are going to get into the debate the Institute's own Eddie Liger Smith had with prominent, politics streamer Vish, and we're going to sort of dissect all of the various sophistries and just sleazy tactics that Vish uses to get away from the substance that Eddie keeps trying to return to. So, that being said, we'll get to that right after this. All right, welcome everybody. You just got me today, so kind of feeling my way out of doing the streaming thing on my own. So forgive me if I get caught up on anything or anything like that. But for anyone who wasn't aware, Eddie debated Vish a few days ago. We did a stream talking about it where Eddie and Carlos and I discussed it, but I really want to break into it and watch it together so we can point out exactly how these sort of rich, spoiled, sort of soft elite kids apologize for empire, the way it works, the way sophistry works, stuff like that, right? So we're going to get to that in a second. I want to just say hi to everybody and apologize for not being Carlos and Eddie. But that's okay. So let me get here. Going to share my screen. We're going to watch it in 1.5 time, I think, because really I can't stand that guy's voice anyway. So the less of it I hear, the better, right? All right. So let's get into it.
Nice. How's your day going?
Oh, pretty good. How about you?
Oh, pretty all right. Mostly been blasting Tears of the Kingdom. You know, lots of attractive furry goat characters in there for me to enjoy the company of.
So already this is kind of weird. I think what he's trying to do is paint Eddie as somehow like against his love of furries or something when that has nothing to do with anything, which is odd. You know, anime people are weird, rich kids are weird. But it has nothing to do with anything. I don't think we've ever talked about that. Why would we? Right? And you know, he's gonna start by feigning politeness while what's really going on is he's sort of got his performance together, right? He's going to put on an illusion of just being aloof and so superior to this whole thing. And he is so smart that he doesn't even have to engage really, right? And that used to work on people back in the day. It really did. These days, though, our conditions are changing to the point where we all have to get serious. And people are just seeing through that sort of thing. Also, just while we're on the subject of introductions, or after, I guess, hi to Rob and Popers and Shalom Chaya. Hello, everyone. And E. Doringer says that he's cringe personified. I would not disagree. It's just irritating listening to him. He acts as if he is like has something to add, but he adds nothing. No, it doesn't matter how cool the words you're saying are, right? It doesn't matter if they sound very left, whatever that means, or revolutionary or whatever. If the concrete implications of them in practice are aid to imperialism in our ruling class, they are imperialist words, right? They're in support of our ruling class. Anyway, that's a lot for the first like 17 seconds of the video.
That's been fun. Totally at the detriment to my content, though. The viewers are begging for more videos, but I tell them, I've got to play the Zelda game. It's a lot of fun. I didn't play the last one.
For sure, you need that relaxation time.
It is a very
And he responds politely. Midwest nice.
very relaxing game. So, what's your for the fine people in my audience? What's your name and what pronouns do you go by?
All right, he's already setting this up, right? He's asking for pronouns. Who cares? Whatever. That's fine. But he's going to set himself up here as being above the Midwestern Marx Institute and Eddie. He's going to pretend he doesn't know who we are. Does pretend he had some confusion about Eddie's role in it when he very obviously knew exactly who he was because he reached out to him for debates in the past, right? So he's going to set himself up as this big timer, right? It's called big timing, and when it comes from a guy who's never done a day of work in his life, I don't think it's a good look, as the leftists would say.
My name's Eddie Liger Smith. That's what I've been going by online for the past few years, and part of the Midwestern Marx Institute. And then him. So
yeah, I didn't realize it was a collective thing. It took me a second. I thought I didn't.
Yeah,
I was
you
conflating
did.
a couple of things, but that's based, right? Collective's a fundamental principle of anarchic governmental organization.
He does this a lot. What he just does, and I'm sorry I keep pausing right away, but he sneaks in what we call what is it? A lie through language, I think is a term for it. He sneaks in anarchic. What does that mean, right? Anarchic governmental organizations. That's not a thing. But anyway, he can have his fantasies about whatever. That's fine. Describing what something else is as your own, kind of weird.
you bet. Or communistic governmental organization, I would say, or party organization. But yeah, we kind of blew up on TikTok, or I blew up on TikTok. So a lot of people associate the Institute with me, but yeah, we got a handful of good people working with us.
Yeah, it's the price of fame. I'm glad that it's going well. Maybe. So yeah, what did you want to talk about this fine day?
Here he is again. What did you want to talk about? He knows exactly what they're talking about. He could introduce it. It's him trying to set the stage, just doing what I call a superiority performance, right? And it's very hollow. What has he earned? What has he done? Nothing, right? Unless he's led some revolution that I'm unaware of, or improved the conditions of the working class, which he's not part of. So I don't know.
I think we had some disagreements over who provoked the current conflict in Ukraine. As I understand it, you side with Ukraine, which I would conflate with siding with NATO. And I think my position is that the war was provoked by NATO and Western aggression and the 2014 coup. And I think you would have some areas of disagreement there.
It's kind of a...
Okay, that's perfect. That is good. Matthew here brought out something really important, and it's power over the technology, right? What he's done is forced Eddie to come into his turf, right? And he's made his voice louder than Eddie's so that he'll be able to interrupt and do his little snide jabs that he thinks are so clever. And as Eddie continues trying to make his point, it won't be heard. Vaush will be louder. So really, really sleazy when you're doing these sort of things, and people do them on purpose, by the way. Let's make that very, very clear. When you're doing these sort of things, it's supposed to be this sort of like way of framing, and you got to win. But if you're going to these underhanded lengths, you're already losing in concrete reality, right? It means, and people see this these days, you just come off as weak and unable to meet someone on equal terms where you discuss the content, the substance, right?
A concession on your part even to admit that, right? Because if one side provoked it, that means the other side started it, right? Like if you say one person provoked a fight, what that means is they said something or did something
Happy birthday,
that led
Cameron.
the other person then to start a fight. So even in your framing, you would have to acknowledge that it's a war started by Russia.
I mean,
so another live language here. Provoke does not necessarily mean start anything. And was this about who started a war? No, it's about what's going on with this war, right? So Vish is going to attempt here to make it seem as if Eddie's going to lose or lose some sort of points by saying that, yes, Russia entered Ukrainian territory, right? What does that matter? Wars don't have a start date, right? Nothing has a start and end in a finite way like that. Scientists even can't tell us the exact point of death. Death is a process, right? All of this is a process. And Eddie's going to try to explain the history and the factors that make up the facts of today's reality. And while he does, Vish is just going to interrupt and, play the whatever clown. But yeah, Eddie just keeps going. Mad respect. I mean, I respect the guy. Anyhow, obviously, I love Eddie, but mad respect for doing that. He just powered through it. Didn't care about the underhanded nonsense Vish was pulling and just kept going and stuck to his guns.
The intervention itself, I consider more of an escalation than a start to the war. I think the war started in 2014 with the U.S. coup, which then provoked the later escalation by Russia as they got fully involved and launched the special military operation.
And these provocations keep going back and forth, it seems. I hope one day these two people can live in peace.
Definitely.
So that strikes me as incredibly disingenuous. I hope one day these two people can live in peace. Well, why would you not be supportive of the peace process then, right? Why would you be in favor, as he says later on, of regime change in Russia, meaning our ruling class somehow removing a sovereign nation's leader from leadership, right? You're not in favor of peace in that way, not at all. And acting as if there's no context for this, it's just silly.
So
definitely,
yeah, seems like a kind of an uphill start for you, given the whole Russia started the war thing. But if you say that it's a continuation of a previously existing conflict, I think I agree with that. I think that's a fair framing to say the war started in 2014. So then I would just go to say, well,
I actually sort of wouldn't say the war started in 2014. There's a lot that built to these kind of things, a lot. It's sort of like saying, and I think he makes this when he makes this parallel in a weird way, when he's asking Eddie for a specific date, that the Civil War in the US, or our second revolution, didn't just begin with Battle X or whatever, right? It began way before that. There were, in the Marxist jargon, imminent contradictions within society that were getting to the point of the impossibility of moving forward, right? And this creates people like John Brown and the guerrilla campaign that they waged against plantations, right? And this creates what went on in Ukraine. There's also one thing, just as an aside, I want to add on this, that the conflict in Ukraine, Vish only knew of it after our media started blowing it up, right? We have people who work for the Institute who've been there, right? And I remember Kayla Popovich, she used to have a shirt that said, "Save Donbass Children," because this has been a long, ongoing thing of neo-Nazis persecuting and attacking Russians and Roma and Jews, etc. So just keep that in mind. 2014 was a tipping point in a way, a rupture, an escalation, but not by any means the beginning. This goes back way, way, way before that.
Russia started the conflict back in 2014 by annexing Crimea and providing soldiers and martial arms to separatist groups in the Donbass, which is a pretty literal example of a proxy war. Considering the fact that Ukraine hadn't, invaded Russia prior or prompted any instigatory secessionist action in Russia, it seems pretty difficult to argue Russia didn't start that too.
All right, here's another thing we got to know about the context that Eddie was trying to get into, and Vish isn't going to let him, right? Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine is a very new nation state, and I've heard a lot of the Vish types sort of try to act as if Putin, who was criticizing Lenin and the correct lines of the Bolsheviks in the national recognition of Ukraine, is talking about it being ultra chauvinistic and nationalistic or whatever. And you know what? I'm not interested in that, but the facts that he was pointing out are correct. Ukraine has changed its shape over the course of its history, which begins with the Soviet Union. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe the word actually means borderlands, right? It was the border of different empires before the arising of the proletariat and the October Revolution. And so what happens is during the existence of the Soviet Union, different parts are sort of added, and very economically important sections of Russia were given to Ukraine or put within the Ukrainian state. Crimea, for example, is one of those. But the entire history of the entire state is mixed up with Russia and Belarus. Okay, this is a very, very important fact to remember. That when they talk about this separation, it's not really the case. When Russians today speak of Ukrainians as their cousins, which is a thing that happens all the time, that's what it is, right? It's very similar to, I'm trying to think of, most of the references I know are Eastern European, so I don't know of a big one from America, but yeah, it's important stuff to remember. Also, thank you, Deanna Troy of Themyscira, and I'm sorry for the super sticker. Thank you very much. Without stuff like that, the Institute couldn't run, so we really appreciate that. Thank you.
I mean, Russia was supporting what has been called in the Western media separatist movements in the Donbass after years and years of provocations from the West. I mean, the West has been promoting neo-Nazism and ethno-nationalism in Ukraine since the end of World War II. I mean, so you could consider that a provocation of Russia. And there's even videos of Joe Biden himself saying that we cannot expand NATO eastward because it would provoke Russia and it would lead to a conflict between Russia and the U.S. Or Russia and Ukraine. Yet the U.S. continued to do that. They were training up NATO troops on Russia's border. Although they weren't actually adding Ukraine to NATO, they continually floated the idea and were training troops to make them NATO interoperable, among all sorts of other.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, everybody. Let me cancel this. There we go.
Regime change efforts or infiltration efforts in Ukraine, which everybody knows is just a swarm of U.S. NGOs, and it's been that way for a very long time.
Sort of like I would say that state, if anything.
So this is something interesting, right? And it shows more dishonesty on Vish's part. Later on, he's going to pretend that there aren't any American NGOs in Ukraine, right? And our politicians have talked about this many, many, many times. There's news reports all over. 2 seconds and you can find out. I mean, open society was there literally before the fall of the Soviet Union. So there's just one, the NED, et cetera, et cetera. But here, he's acting as if he knows this, right? And he says, kind of like the 51st state, if anything, which I don't know what that means, but whatever. Thank you, David. Thank you very much, brother, for the super sticker.
I would say that the NATO project in Ukraine has always been to support ethno-nationalism, knowing that that's a way to provoke and attack Russia. And I mean, that was proven by Angela Merkel saying
hold
that
your horses. You brought up hold your horses.
Here we go. He's trying to set the stage, right? He's giving the history, the context that makes up the facts, the factors, as we say, that create the facts. And here's Vish interrupting, right? Hold your horses. We gotta reduce everything to one detail that we're going to distort.
Let me finish my point.
You brought up like 4 points so far, so we got to go one at a time.
No, I'm bringing up the point of Western interventionism in Ukraine that
Are you starting to bring up a new
You
point?
said that Russia was backing separatists in the Donbass region. That was in response to all of this aggression from the U.S., which Angela Merkel admitted in 2014. The U.S. never had any intentions to sign a peace agreement. Their whole goal was to build up
We're not at war with anyone there.
in Ukraine so that they could eventually launch an attack against Russia.
Okay,
But Russia,
all right, well, hold it. Okay, listen,
and got involved before the U.S.
I'm excited to talk about this
There's that volume thing in action, right?
too, but my God, you know, I'm getting old. I'm nearly 30. I can't remember these points if you insecurely list 7 at a time.
Oh, and another thing. Okay, this is something that sort of rich kids love to do. What they'll do is try to make a point and offhandedly act like that. When he says the word insecurely, it's very clear that there's, well, 2 things. One, I know Eddie very well. He is not insecure on this. If he was insecure, he would not be doing this, right? He would be reading as much as he can and becoming competent in his knowledge of the subject, right? But when he adds that little like remark in there, he extends his superiority performance, and then he goes right on to the next thing, so it can't be discussed, right? And this is the second thing. How on earth would he know the inner workings of Eddie's mind? How can he know he's insecure, right? Is he a mind reader? Most of these sort of idealist, sort of silly notions of rich kids like this come from an ideological issue of idealism. They don't understand what that sort of what a more materialist analysis is, and it just sort of comes up to them as natural, and that's natural within the upper classes to do, right? It's a part of the social consciousness built by the social relations within those classes. So I noticed, actually, as I was saying this, I'm not sure if you're referring to me or Vish here, but if you're referring to me, no, it's sort of more of a class analysis. And I'm just using rich kids as a stand-in for the remnants of the middle classes.
If you trust your points, you have to go one by one, because otherwise it makes me think you want to run away from them. Now, what's interesting to me is we were talking about provocation, and then you went on.
Well, he could go on his points one by one, but the entire thing there was the point, right?
This whole jibber-jabber rant about ethno-nationalism and right. So,
and the evidence of
all of this framing established, we must acknowledge then what you're describing, if you get down to it, is kind of like a copy collection of excuses for.
Oh, here we go again, right? You can't, it's another lie through language. When you describe something as if you've already been proven correct, this is clearly a point of contention, right? Until you are proven correct, you can't use language that implies you are correct, right? You have to use the neutral language. Literally, high school debate clubs are taught not to do this. And so for a grown man, I mean, granted, yes, he's never had a job. He doesn't understand the world like we do. But for a grown man to go through life without knowing that, I don't buy it. So my assumption is that he does it on purpose.
Russia to start the war. Now, if you want, we can talk about the nature of these so-called provocations. I'm totally fine with that. But even in the framing you're presenting, I came here neutral, but you're moving me over to the position that it must have been Russia who started the conflict.
More performance. He has his position. He's just so above it all and smart.
Otherwise, you wouldn't be framing all of these as provocations to justify them doing so. You would be
How are they
talking
not
about times. No, see, you don't understand.
How are
You
they not
keep-
provocations when Angela Merkel literally admitted that the whole goal of what the U.S. and NATO were doing in Ukraine was to attack Russia?
So you don't. You're
I mean,
still not
NATO said it.
understanding. It's okay. I can repeat that part. You keep talking about provocations. Every time you say they provoke this, they provoke that, what you're saying is they provoked Russia into starting the.
All right. He's going back to this again. This seems like something that in his preparation, he really thought would be a gotcha, right? If he can get Eddie to say Russia started the war, then who cares? We can say Russia started the war. Whatever. Does that matter? He thinks it's like some loss, right? And so he's going back and completely derailing the context that he is trying to set by moving the conversation backwards so he can pretend he won something. We just got a super chat though. Let's check this out real quick. Hey Noah, can we get your thoughts on the Jordan Neely situation? Leftists were saying it's bourgeois to want to save public transit and cities. We can talk about that a little later. Someone do me a favor and remind me of that. I want to get through the debate right now, though. I do have a few different thoughts on that because it's a very complicated situation when something like that happens. But yeah, let's get back to the debate, really.
The war, right? That's what provocation means. We're not talking about
They
times
provoked
Ukraine started the war.
because
Right?
you're ignoring what I said. They provoked Russia to escalate the war in 2022. The war itself began in 2014 when the U.S. allowed a very anti-Russian government to come to power. When these U.S.-backed ethno-nationalist groups like Right
when did
Sector,
the war begin?
C-14, the Azov Battalion escalated the Maidan protest into an actual violent overthrow of the government
when
that
did the
allowed
war
for these neo-Nazi paramilitaries to.
All right, good example of sort of sliding into empiricism. The inability to understand the interconnected interconnected processes that lead to things that create, to use the sort of dialectical jargon, the quantitative changes that lead to a qualitative change, right? So all of the provocations Eddie is trying to get to that lead to a qualitative change in state, escalation of violence, right? To an official, formal military operation.
To gain a real foothold and begin shelling the homes of civilians in the Donbass,
So
killing
jibber
14,000 people in total and 5,000 civilians in the Donbass specifically.
It speaks to your lack of confidence in these points.
So what he's doing here is just trying to talk over him, and he's going to go to the personal pretend insults that he's making up, and or he has psychic powers, maybe, I don't know, to prevent Eddie from talking, right? That's all he's doing here.
Points that you feel the need to run off with them. I asked you specifically. You're already getting upset.
You have to continue interrupting me when I'm laying out what happened.
Ed, listen, okay, there's laying out, all right, and then there's a 40-year land making project, all right? You need to slow down. We'll get to all these points. It's okay. I'm happy to be.
What he's also trying to do is take control of the conversation. I'm sorry I keep pausing, but it's just so sleazy and gross and just typical of these spoiled rich kids. I'm sorry. He's trying to make it so he's asking the questions and directing where things go. He gets to pretend to be the big man, you know?
Talking to you too, but you don't need to script read at me. I asked you specifically when you think the war began. So I'm saying that Russia started the war. You keep talking about provocations that led to Russia started.
So we want to focus on where the war began.
Yeah,
I would say in 2014, the war in the Donbass started.
Who cares who started the war? Right? There is so much else to be considered. If you're sitting there and you're holding a gun, right, and you're loading bullets into it, right? So let's say it's a revolver. You got bullets. You're just putting them in the revolver. Just, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to shoot you. And before you get to that sixth bullet, I pop you in the face. I started a fight. But does that matter? Of course not. It's reducing the entire situation in order to dishonestly imply blame somewhere, right? It's really, again, just really sleazy.
And I would say who started the war? I mean, it was a combination of the ethno-nationalist neo-Nazi forces in Ukraine, like Right Sector, the paramilitary arm of Right Sector, Azov Battalion, and C-14, who were being propped up, funded, and supported politically by the den of U.S. NGOs that existed in Ukraine for a long time.
That started the war?
The coup that allowed for ethno-nationalists and militias and right-wing paramilitaries.
You can answer without the addendum.
Let me finish.
But will you repeat it every time? Because I want to get through to this. We're going to take forever.
He's also already acting as if it is a war between Ukraine and Russia. And that's not really the situation. Now, our ruling class is absolutely using this as a proxy war against Russia, but the war is a civil war within Ukraine, right? That is what's happening. And the progressive forces of this civil war have been begging Russia to step in and help them because Nazis have been murdering them for years. And so as Vish tries to paint this as Putin is irrational and he just started a war, no, that's not the case.
This rate.
That is... If you continue to ask me questions and then interrupt me when I try and answer, it will take a long time.
If I ask you, if I tell you that I need to go to the bathroom at some point, will you tell me that? Yeah, in addition to this,
to start acting with impunity, start shelling the homes of civilians in the Donbass, and
he just laughed at his own joke.
And that's what started essentially a civil war in Ukraine.
You already
Russia escalated and intervened in 2020.
You already named like several things. So I asked you when the war started, and then you did the script reading.
2014 with the coup.
Right, 2014 with the coup. So did the coup? So when Yanukovych fled, that was the beginning of a declaration of war.
Another manipulation. He's trying to bring it into where he wants it to go by leaving out key elements, right? And I want to let's go over these elements because he was so obsessed with this timeline and exact dates. So I looked up the dates. On February 22nd of 2014, the Ukrainian parliament held a vote to impeach Yanukovych, right? That vote failed. Turchinov then dismissed him anyway, which is illegal. And that's when he became the interim president of a state that's no longer following its own constitution, right? So whether it's really a state or not at that point is up for debate. Anyway, the next day, Yanukovych got to Kharkiv. 2 days after that, he goes to Crimea. And that is a day the new government's installed, meaning that Vish's weird, but the president fled narrative omits very, very key details. And the timeline he was pretending to be obsessed with isn't even the actual timeline anyway, because the coup, there's no other word for what I just explained, was going on while he was in Ukraine. He fled because there were threats on his life by neo-Nazis, the neo-Nazis that Vish here is defending. So much for his anti-fascism, right?
I want a like specific answer. Wars are big deals, you know. Wars aren't like nebulous. It's not like a TikTok beef or whatever you guys do, social media clout influencer. Wars are like big things. They're usually like Fort Sumter with the U.S. Civil War, for example. If I asked a person, when did the Civil War begin? And they were like, well, it began when Lincoln violated the rights of the southern states by refusing to acknowledge and enforce the Dred Scott. It's well, okay, well, all right. Now, but when did the war begin?
More manipulation through using a clearly improbable parallel. That doesn't connect. Come on.
I ask you.
I would say when Right Sector took hold of most of the government buildings, and their leader said that we are not going to hand over these buildings until Yanukovych is dismissed as president. Those are our demands. And at that point, Yanukovych fled, and the paramilitaries were able to essentially act with impunity and start shelling the homes of civilians in eastern Ukraine.
Wait, hold on.
And that's the war.
Wait, hold on. The coup,
it's civilians in eastern Ukraine versus the Ukrainian government.
The way you're making it sound, it's like the guys in the Maidan, like they left the Capitol building and then walked 1,000 miles east.
Does anyone think that's how he was making it sound? Am I crazy for thinking he made it sound nothing like that? I don't know. What do you guys think? It's very weird for him to go there. It seems more performance. It's always got, it's as if he's like a hollow shell shaped like this guy, right? And inside him, there's just nothing, you know?
with artillery pieces and started shelling like orphanages. You keep blurring things. When did the war start? Was it when they entered the Capitol building? Because hey, listen, I love me some anti-Republican hysteria, but I don't think January 6th was a war. You know, it was an attempt at an
There's
insurrection.
no.
You think it was a war when they
It's
protested
very
the
silly to
Yanukovych out?
say that. And
I would
even
say it
he's
was a
smart
war
enough to
when
know
they
that.
started taking military actions against like Lugansk, Donetsk, these places in the
Okay,
Donbass
so it
where
wasn't actually
14,000 people were killed.
So it wasn't actually the Yanukovych bit. That's just like the predecessor to this. What we're really
No, it's that too. It's all of it. It's what he's doing is trying to narrow it down to the point of absurdity.
talking
Yes,
about
that
is
was the
conflict in
pretext
the
that allowed
Donbass.
for it to happen. But that, as you said, wars are very serious things. So it's important to understand not just when they started or you know who provoked them, but also the pretext that allowed them to happen. And the pretext of this war is a U.S.-backed coup that would have been impossible without U.S. NGOs backing these groups
And
like Right Sector,
Joe Biden
who
and such,
first
right.
took power of the government and then waged the war against the people of the Donbass.
So I'm still really confused. So you say the war began when the Right Sector marched over 1,000 miles east with artillery pieces. That's fine. That can happen.
All right. So see what he did there? He made something up completely from his own head. And then as Eddie's saying something that has nothing to do with that, he continues and says, okay, so you say this thing that I made up. Okay, that's cool. Let's think about it in those terms. And then he goes from that premise. It's just another lie.
But
I mean, Right Sector spread out. The 100% of the Right Sector troops weren't in Maidan, right?
Well, you were kind of blurring it all
power
together.
Of the government consolidated power, not necessarily the neo-Nazis, but like I said, they consolidated power in that they were essentially able to act with impunity after the coup. And then, yes, they marched east and began their offensive against civilians in the Donbass.
Against civilians.
Yeah, Russia did then start supporting.
Oh, what date did that happen? The attacks in the civilian population, out of curiosity.
It began in 2014 and it's lasted through
by the way,
today.
Oh, I know it's happened in 2014. I'm asking you when the date was, because that just seems odd. So they're far-right people. Now, I admit far-right people are pretty evil. I wouldn't put it...
Also, I'm sorry I keep pausing, you guys. I promise we will get through this. But there's one really big key event here that makes the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk decide to have their votes and secede, and that is the Odessa massacre. And you'll see Vish is very careful to avoid that subject altogether because all of their statements point to that as the straw that broke the camel's back, right? And you can see the disgusting videos of this online as neo-Nazis laugh as innocent people were burned alive inside a trade union hall. And that was when they knew that they would get no democracy, they would get no justice. They needed to protect themselves any way they could.
Pass them to do all sorts of bad stuff. But they just, to celebrate ousting Yanukovych, they just start shelling civilian buildings. That's an odd... Why would they... Was there a disagreement? What happened?
That's the ethno-nationalist ideology. That's the neo-fascist ideology that the U.S. That's the Banderite ideology. I say the U.S. has backed this ideology since World War II, but even before that, during the World War, they were, more so Britain than the U.S. were backing Stepan Bandera, an ally of Hitler, who was, staunchly anti-Russian, anti-Polish, anti-Jewish, and they've allowed this ethno-nationalist ideology that holds Bandera as a hero to fester in Ukraine, and they funneled money into it until they could, or until those paramilitaries and militias became emboldened enough to where they could wage a full-scale war against the largely Russian-speaking and largely culturally Russian people in eastern Ukraine, who were beginning, like you said, to separate and see what was going on with the Maidan coup, this anti-Russian government take power.
Well, hold on now. Wait, you added a little detail there. We're beginning to separate. What happened? You're this timeline that you keep omitting things. I just want to get a full picture. What was the date that actions in the...
Yet another lie. Someone should keep track of the amount of lies, and we'll do like a tally at the end. If someone wants to do that, you'll have my eternal gratitude. But you're gonna have to start at where we're at, 1355. So,
Donbass begin to take place from the Right Sector?
Like full-scale military actions to where they're able to act with impunity. Because before
I'm just
that,
wondering if anything happened beforehand.
Because the conflict between the nationalists and the Russian speakers in Ukraine has been raging for a long time, right? The 2014 coup really brought it to a head because it allowed these groups like Right Sector to act with impunity and start blowing up the homes of civilians.
Eddie, I asked for a date.
2014. Yeah,
That's
dude,
not a
I don't
date,
know
Eddie.
the
That's a
exact.
year.
I do not know the exact month, time, and date when the first shell was fired at civilian homes in the Donbass.
Okay.
But I can tell you that 2014 onward, 14,000 people were killed there. The majority of them being people in the Donbass. Yes,
Yeah,
of course,
that's
there were
horrible.
people killed on
So
the Ukrainian side. That's how war
the
works.
reason I'm asking, because I, a neutrally minded person who's just looking to get the straight facts, I'm reading up on this right now, and it says that on April 12th, 2014, of course, armed members of the Donbass People's Militia seized government buildings in Kramatorsk and Sovietsk and set up checkpoints in.
You hear that? April, right? Now, which month comes first? Is it February or April? I believe it's February, right? When the coup happened.
Barricades. And the same day, former members of the Donetsk Berkut unit joined the ranks of the Donbass People's Militia. So it seemed like, now I don't know the exact timeline here, you'll have to fill me in. It seems like there was an actual armed military insurrection in the Donbass, which makes me wonder if any violence that took place there afterwards might have actually been provoked by these separatist groups.
I'm just curious.
We like talking about provocation.
Is Wikipedia the source on that?
No. Do you want like the source? Do you want to look at it?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Wait,
I'll
actually,
take it. But yeah,
wait,
yeah.
What's your
like
date for that though?
What?
What's your date for that though? Are you denying that ever happened?
No. Like as I said earlier, not only were there groups.
Did you see how excited he looked when he said, "Are you denying that ever happened?"
Groups who were arming up and defending themselves in the Donbass, but those groups were backed by Russia. Russia was supporting these groups, right? That doesn't justify a fascist ethno-nationalist coup, right? Of course, like if you see these ethno-nationalists who have hated Russians for years, who are putting up statues of Stepan Bandera,
Wait, you're getting confused again.
This mass murderer who hated Russians, and these groups like Right Sector
before this.
continuing to seize in these groups like Right Sector, continuing to seize more and more power. Yeah,
Eddie,
you're going to arm yourself. You're going to defend yourself. This is people defending their home.
You're getting the timeline confused. Eddie, you're getting the timeline confused.
Here's Vish pretending that Eddie's just doesn't know the timeline. No, of course he knows that this is after the coup. He's the one who was talking about the coup prompting this. And yes, that's absolutely true. I apologize. I got to get better at that.
Coup was before this. It seems like to me Yanukovych was ousted, and then military groups in the east formed the Donbass People's Militia and seized government buildings.
As I said before, dude. As I said, I feel like you're playing dumb on purpose.
Wait, then where did Ukraine?
You're smarter than this. As I said before, the conflict. Let me finish. The conflict between the Ukrainian ethno-nationalists and the Russian speakers was going on for a very, very, very long time before the coup happened. The coup allowed it to come to a head and essentially gave these groups like Right Sector, who have always hated Russian-speaking people in the Donbass region, ethnically Russian people in the Donbass region, to act with impunity and start
confused again, Eddie.
So yes, there were militia. No, you're confused. There were militias in the Donbass who were arming themselves and preparing to protect themselves before the coup happened.
Okay.
Yes, and yeah, Russia was supporting them.
It's just
that doesn't mean I support a Nazi coup. It doesn't mean I support blowing up people's homes.
You're running.
And it doesn't mean in this broader conflict I'm going to side with
NATO.
You're
moving on. All right, we're pulling you back. Okay. So it's just interesting.
Another performance where he tries to pretend he's superior. It's getting tired, isn't it?
That when you initially described what began in the Donbass, you said there was a coup, and then the Right Sector marched over and started shelling civilians. And what you neglected to mention was several thousand militiamen and former soldiers trying to secede from the government by seizing government buildings. So it seems like there was a middle point there where the way you described it, I thought these guys, they did the coup, Yanukovych ousted, and then they just went over and started killing Russian-speaking people in the East. But then in the middle of those two things, there were actually thousands of soldiers who seized government buildings and set up barricades. That, I don't know, Eddie, as a person who's just learning about this, I feel like that might actually warrant some kind of military aggression in response.
All right, let's discuss this because this is actually important. What Vish is pretending doesn't exist are the continual escalations, the back and forth between the people within East Ukraine who were basically complaining that the democracy had faded from the country and a Nazi coup government had taken its place. The Odessa massacre, the ramping up of violence, all of this stuff takes place between them, then arming themselves in defense, right? They're begging Russia for help and it's not coming. They have to do something. You know, remember, these are mostly Russian people. They're very interconnected. The Ukrainian and Russian people are just like that, man, especially in the East.
I mean, also
would you
these are
do if
places
people
that
seized
these are
government
also
buildings?
places that voted to become independent republics. So they're perfect. As I said, it's their own land where they've lived for years. So they're
That's
perfectly
not how countries work,
they're
Eddie.
perfectly right to take to hold control of government buildings in that region, especially when it's obvious that right sector and these other groups are going to want to gain control of buildings in eastern Ukraine.
That's
So the
not how
people of the
countries
Donbass
work,
dug them
Eddie.
their heels.
Are
And
you
also,
familiar with the Civil War?
you're lying and you're saying that I just said everything started with a coup. No, I've been very, very clear that this is a conflict that culminated in the coup, and that the people in the Donbass were preparing to have to defend themselves from the ethno-nationalists who had been a persistent problem in Ukraine. I mean, they knew that for years, right?
I did ask you for a starting point. You said the coup, but that's okay. We can amend this as much as we need to.
Yeah, see what I mean? He's acting as if his starting point in question was some big important thing. Another lie.
Complicated bit of history. However, I'm sorry to say, we don't actually live in a communist utopia. Just because people in an area don't want to be part of a country doesn't actually mean that you can have thousands of soldiers seize local government positions. That's the kind of thing that does lead to military aggression.
More lying through language. That is clearly not what happened. They didn't just decide they didn't want to be part of this country. When the coup happens, the legitimacy of the state is gone. Their democratic rights have been withheld from them. So Vish, who from a moral perspective, should be saying, well, their democratic rights are gone. They have every right to stand up for them and take them. But he doesn't say that, does it? Because no matter what he says about ethics, morality, whatever, he needs to end up supporting our ruling class because he's very close to that class.
If you pay attention,
So then
to
you're
history,
against the
well, hold on,
Euro
wait, hold on.
Maidan.
I'm not done. Hold on. If you pay attention to your history class, there was a thing in the United States called the Civil War, where the South argued that they had the right to secede from the Union because they had different values and goals. They were wrong.
Another fake parallel. Who could have seen that one coming, right? Not a real parallel. This isn't why the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk seceded at all.
Apparently, history proved them wrong. This actually happens quite a lot. You can't have, like, Texas couldn't secede today. You would need a really strong moral argument for secession in order for there to be, I think, a reasonable discussion.
Yeah, like civilians having their homes bombed by neo-Nazis.
Wait,
how's that for a strong moral
but
argument?
they formed the militia before the fighting started.
No, they did not.
Yes, but the neo-Nazis had been there long before, and they had been killing people long before. But
You seem
after the coup,
confused
they
on
were
the
able to
timeline.
act with impunity and escalated greatly. Again, you're being dumb on purpose.
Wait,
Come on.
I think we're both confused about the timeline now. So there was this
The
fighting in the
timeline,
Donbass
I'm
before,
so sick of
because
hearing
you
this
didn't even
thing talk
mention the
about a
thousands of
timeline.
people in the Donbass militia. What else are you leaving out of this? What did the right
I
sector
mentioned
By the way, it's also funny that he doesn't understand how the Civil War started.
the
do
people in
in
the
the
Donbass
East
militia, and I
to
even said they're
warrant
backed by Russia.
thousands of soldiers rising up to seize government buildings? Because as far
You're
as I
just
can tell,
lying.
that's the first violent thing that happened. Seems like
He knows very well it wasn't. So this is another lie.
Russia's provoking
No,
conflict.
that's
We
not
like
the
that
first
little
one. I mean,
ding,
it'd be
ding
impossible to
counter,
place the
you
first
know?
violent thing that happened, but based on my knowledge, you could go all the way back to World War II with the massacres that Stepan Bandera committed against Jews and Poles and all sorts of
that was the first time there was
minorities in
violence
Ukraine.
in Ukraine.
No, I said you could go back way further than that, but based
Oh.
on my knowledge of Ukraine, that's where I could pinpoint, or that's where I
That
know
was
of
just
the
a
first
way to
ethno-nationalist
prevent
violence
Eddie
happening.
from talking.
Obviously, there's tons of violence in every country going back all throughout their history.
Sometimes,
I feel like
people
you're
get
trying
in
to get
fights
caught
on
up
the
on
streets.
semantics here because you realize your broader argument puts you in support of NATO and NATO-backed
Wait.
neo-Nazis.
I haven't even made an argument. I'm just really interested in the timeline. We keep finding little bits that you leave out, but that's okay. We're both learning, right? I mean, you learned about the Civil War and that you
I
can't
haven't
actually
learned
secede.
anything from this. You're just
Well,
asking semantics debates, and I'm trying to explain
That seems
a
like
really
a personal
complex
problem,
piece
man.
of history that led to the current conflict.
That seems like a personal problem, man. I wonder how he would speak if he were sitting like in a room with Eddie or me or anybody, right? You think he'd act that way? It sort of grinds my gears when like soft sort of I'm gonna say I know I said I need to work on not saying it, when soft rich kids, spoiled kids talk like this, knowing that they're they're safe. He would not say that to a single person where I'm from. He just wouldn't.
learning. So okay, let me
Yeah, I'm glad I could educate you.
let's reestablish. Okay, we'll track the timeline.
Yeah.
So Yanukovych is ousted, right? In the protests, Euromaidan, blah blah. And then thousands of soldiers In the east, the separatists seize control of government buildings, set up barricades, blockades, so on and so forth. And then in response to military occupation of government property, soldiers move east in order to fight them.
He's making this up. He knows this isn't the case. He knows no one thinks this.
Am I incorrect on this?
Soldiers who had just occupied government property in Kiev and
so they really did move 1,000 miles east.
Who the people in eastern Ukraine? I love how you ask a question, then you immediately have to interrupt.
You said they didn't just walk 1,000 miles east right after, but I guess they did.
That's so funny. You won't even let me finish. You ask me a question, then you don't let me finish the sentence.
I just think it's funny that they walked 1,000 miles east right after the coup, but it doesn't matter.
I just think it's funny. Does he? No lie.
They can do that if planes exist, man. Did you know that? Okay, so
yes, and there's also people from right sector, man, all over the country. They weren't just all concentrated in Kiev. The leadership was, a lot of them were, they seized government buildings and ousted the democratically elected leader who the people in the Donbass rightfully voted for. Well, the people on the Donbass saw the writing on the wall and organized themselves and got ready to defend their own territory from this neo-Nazi, undemocratically elected U.S. puppet government that took power.
U.S.
and that's what led into the war of the Donbass.
Okay, so let's address this. Every time I ask you a question, you take 5 minutes to remind me about all the Nazis.
Wars are very complex, like you said.
Well, of course.
A long time
so
to explain these things.
I'm looking for an opportunity to learn more on this particular subject. So it seems like in terms of organized violence following the coup, it was actually your guys who started it. Thousands of soldiers seizing government buildings is undeniably an act of massive aggression, arguably war, especially since you've acknowledged the fact that Russia backed them. So it seems like Russia both started and provoked this war. But I'm interested in the moral side of things, right?
Okay, so he does this again. He makes a conclusion that it is under contention and then switches as if he's sort of Lord on high of being correct. Typical middle class thing.
You keep talking about the right sector, the Nazis, the so on and so forth, right? Now, again, I don't know anything about this whole subject, but I'm aware even of Azov Battalion, there being Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, I've heard the stories.
You don't know who right sector is?
No, I didn't say. I just said I know about. Well, hold on. Wait, listen. Do you want me to? Okay, that's fine. We'll keep going.
I just thought you said that. That was surprising to me. So I just want a clarification.
No. I know. I've heard stories about all this. Okay. You know, about the Nazis and what have you. But what's interesting?
I'm so aloof. My name is Vish. Look how aloof I am.
To me is that when I look at Ukraine's government broadly, I don't really get the impression of a genocidal government. You know, the Nazis government, like the Nazis, right, were genocidal, of course. That was key and component to their ideology. I saw stuff Ukraine has done that I don't agree with. There was the Ukraine language law.
Wait a minute. Is he for real trying to say that it's not a neo-Nazi coup government? Has he seen any pictures of any of the military? Has he not seen them making Stepan Bandera postage stamps? Has he not seen them making all left-wing parties illegal, shutting down media, imprisoning the Kovanovich brothers? Like, all of these things are a neo-Nazi thing to do, right? They have like Stepan Bandera streets and everything there now. Even Zelensky, who ran on a sort of neutrality peace ticket, has been forced to say that Bandera is a cool dude, right? The idea that he doesn't see the Nazis is absurd. There is no honest way to not talk about them as a neo-Nazi coup government. So therefore, ding, another lie.
For example, I think that's pretty cringe. I don't support that. But
you don't see that as a genocidal policy to try and crack down on minority languages. And the main thing about the language law too is it tries to assert the Ukrainian identity as being people who speak Ukrainian. So it's essentially designed to say Russian speakers are not Ukrainian. They don't have a place in our country. It's a form of dehumanization.
All right, I think
it goes right along with genocidal
so
policy.
I think
very
that's
much is, and it went alongside genocidal policies when our ruling class here was doing it back in the day, wasn't it?
Hysterical. I think it's bad, and I agree that it indicates ethnic and linguistic preference. Many countries
would he call that ethnic and linguistic preference when it was happening in the U.S.?
Have national languages or have legal distinctions between preferred and non-preferred languages. I'm not defending
right, and that's not what experts on this issue have a problem with. What they have a problem with is
are they experts here in the call?
What experts have said is the issue with the Ukrainian language law is that it asserts a single identity for the people of Ukraine based on the language that they speak. You know, which then dehumanizes and says that the people who speak Russian aren't actually Ukrainian citizens. They don't have a place here.
Yeah,
which
I agree that
starts
it
to lean
indicates
towards a
ethnic bias.
genocidal policy. It might be, it's definitely hyperbolic to say that that in itself is genocide,
That comes a
but
bit
it's certainly an
namby-pamby to me.
anti-Russian policy that could go hand in hand with genocide. I also want to
For real? Is he saying that's namby-pamby?
say, to go back to
But we
something
weren't
that
done.
you said earlier that I let slip.
I was
This
learning
is
more.
in response to what you said. You said that most of the violence was committed by quote unquote my guys in the Donbass.
They started it,
the
it seems, in
militaries and
terms of
separatists.
organized violence. Yeah.
Again, acting as if he's won on some point of contention already. It's very sleazy.
Right. Their acts of organized violence pale. I mean, them digging in their heels and defending their own land from the undemocratically elected coup government pales in comparison to, say, the Maidan sniper attacks that were committed by the protesters. And we now know, thanks to the scholarship of Ivan Kachanovsky, were being led up by these ethno-nationalist forces, Right Sector, C-14, Azov Battalion, etc. Or
I'm very
the
happy to
Odessa
hear that
Trade
you
Union
remembered another
hospital,
talking point you forgot to
which-
go over. But it's kind of going
or the-
backwards
the-
now.
Notice there's no substance, another talking point you forgot to go over. Everything is avoiding the points Eddie is making. If he engages with the point, especially about the sniper shootings during Maidan, he's going to lose because the facts are not on his side. So what he has to do is hide from them and hide behind this sort of structure of superiority that he's been creating during this entire thing. It's a very silly thing to do. It's sleazy, it's dishonest, but I mean, that's what he's been doing this whole time.
Odessa trade union building, where trade unionists were burned alive.
Eddie,
these acts of violence,
Eddie,
anything that the people of the Donbass did to defend
you might
themselves
notice,
pales in comparison
you
to
might
those,
notice that whole. Wait, are you? No, hold on. Are you reading off a script? I saw your pupils wander. Wait, are you reading from?
More misdirection. Look how excited he is that he thinks he's found a gotcha too. By the way, Eddie was in Vish's Zoom call. He had no chat. He had no script, no nothing. He had notes. Every good debater is going to prepare notes.
Chat right now? Did somebody in your chat remind you?
I literally have. I don't even have the Zoom open. I can't even see myself.
I saw your eyes wander. It was like you had a paragraph you forgot to read, and you were like, "Wait, hold on, gotta start this." Man, it's okay. I'm here. Listen,
why are you
this is my job. We can talk about
this is
all
so
of this.
Fucking funny.
Wait, what did I just lie about?
Hold on, you lied and said I'm reading off a script. Let me screenshot my screen and send it to you.
Wait, but your eyes wandered off the screen though. Do you have anything written down?
My eyes wander a lot.
Show me your entire house.
I'm trying to think of a lot of complex.
Show me your whole house right now.
Words are very complex, like you said.
So we were talking about who instigated martial organized violence, and what you just said has nothing to do with it.
I'm taking a screenshot right now to prove this because that's hilarious.
Sure. Can you give me like a video tour of your house after we're done too, just so I can really check to make sure that you did all this like off the cuff?
Oh, that was so funny. Did you guys see how funny that was? It was amazing. Oh my God. I take it all back. Vish is hilarious. Well done, Vish. Well done.
You probably know Vistaprint for business cards,
Sorry
but did you know we also print
everybody.
that and that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I spent all day reading and researching because unlike you, I actually like to read the things that I talk about.
Can you take a video of you reading to prove it?
Yes,
okay.
I will.
Thank you. So
and
anyway,
then you make a video reading all the theory.
So tangents aside, we were talking about the language law.
Oh,
yeah, you were being a bit
Militia.
hysterical about it. I agree it's very bad. I don't think it's genocidal. But apart from all of that, I don't get the impression the Ukrainian government is, well, genocidal. A Jewish president is a pretty strong argument against Nazi organization. I mean,
No, it isn't. He clearly, as we'll see later on, knows about color revolutions. He knows about interest groups and the inner contradictions of these things. He's just saying common sort of bourgeois mass media talking points that they try to dupe people with. Now, when a well-funded bourgeois talking head like this is saying that same thing, right? What does that make them, right? Like, what is the purpose of that? He's doing the exact same job as all of the bourgeois media does. He's duping people.
I know that's a pretty common one, but again, it's like Jews are a big no-no to Nazis. You said yourself that Bandera types are pro-Nazi, anti-Jew. It's just odd that Zelensky would see not only successful elections, but like now overwhelmingly successful elections
I know.
in the face of the recent 3-day special military operation.
Yeah, I would say it's a big misconception, even on the pro-Russia, anti-NATO left, that people think all of Ukraine is Nazis, or that, the leadership themselves are Nazis. Like Poroshenko at multiple points, Zelensky at multiple points have tried to quell the conflict, have tried to quell the fighting between the ethno-nationalists. But there's videos of Zelensky going into the Donbass region and having talks with these leaders of these ethno-nationalist groups and asking them to lay down arms, and they essentially mock him. Right? They essentially say, no, we're not going to listen to you. We can act with impunity now. So it's not
Why
that
can they act
all
with
of
impunity?
Ukraine is neo-Nazis or Zelensky himself.
How can he not know the very, very famous story about Zelensky going to these neo-Nazi battalions, asking them to lay down arms and begin a peace process, and them literally laughing at him? How can he not know about the statements they've made saying that the minute Zelensky steps out of line, they will hang him from a tree? I mean, this is very, very common knowledge.
Itself is a neo-Nazi. It's that Zelensky's just a NATO puppet that's allowing the neo-Nazis to act with impunity, and those are the ones who really have the power in Ukraine, as exemplified by the fact that Right Sector was the one who, during the coup, seized the government buildings instead until Yanukovych is dismissed.
So
we're not going to hand back the government.
Okay, so
they're the ones running shit,
I appreciate you acknowledging this. So you're saying that the government of Ukraine is not actually run by the democratically elected leader who enjoys massive popular support from the country, but rather a group of far-right militiamen who are fighting in the east.
He is doing another lie through language, right? He's restating it in a way that slightly changes the particularity of the general comment Eddie was making, which is where it does the power lie, ignoring all of the evidence that Eddie is providing and stating it in a way that makes it sound absurd. But if you look behind what the actual words he's saying, there's no substance to it. It's just another performance. Also, this seems like his natural resting face.
How did they do that?
Run is I mean, there's conflicting political parties in Ukraine, conflicting political ideas, and there's conflict, within the Ukrainian
But
parliament.
how, like, what
so there's no one
mechanism-
person running things, right? But these ethno-nationalists, since the coup, when they seized hold of the government buildings and dismissed the democratically elected leader, have had an outsized influence and an outsized power in this country.
You can't dismiss a leader like that. They don't have the authority. He fled.
More nonsense. We went over the timeline, right? We did that.
Russia.
Right. Well, let me read straight from I have a quote here in my notes of
your notes.
The guy from.
I thought you didn't have anything to read.
He has notes.
No, you said I have a script, and I told you I have notes because I've been reading about this all day, and I can see that you haven't done much reading.
Eddie.
Vaush.
I didn't do reading because I was looking forward to being educated by you. It's kind of shocking that I've had to correct you on so many inconsistencies in the time.
More lying through language. It's shocking that I've had to correct you. He's, again, assuming he's won on a point of contention. High school kids are taught not to do that.
You haven't corrected shit.
Yeah.
The agreements that were reached, this was after Right Sector seized hold of the major government buildings in Kiev. The agreements that we have reached do not correspond to our aspirations.
What is this?
Right Sector will not.
So, not to get all weird about it, you notice how he was like crossing his arms there? Anyone who reads body language, I know that's a thing, but I don't know what it is.
Not lay down arms. Right Sector will not lift the blockade of a single administrative building until our main demand is met: the resignation of Yanukovych. Then Yanukovych resigned and he exiled. After Right Sector literally seized hold of all the major government buildings after massacring a bunch of people in Maidan Square. And when Yanukovych was trying to stay in power and keep the government going, Right Sector said, we're not going to lay down arms and we're not going to give back the government buildings until this guy leaves. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about when we say these ethno-nationalist groups have an outsized influence in Ukraine. And actually, I didn't even know this so much until I was reading today. It's increased since 2014, right? At first, Zelensky was giving speeches trying to bring peace, trying to calm down these ethno-nationalist groups, but they've continued to grow in size, continue to gain power and outsized influence in Ukraine until Russia intervened, and then essentially, Zelensky had no choice but to
Eddie.
And the U.S. had no choice but to use the Azov battalion and these other groups as their main fighting force against Russia and just start arming them.
Eddie, you did it again.
Someone has brought up a good point in the chat I wanted to mention. Julian here says, did he, though? He was gearing up for invasion. And here's the part I wanted to mention. I think Zelensky was at least genuine at one point. Obviously, he's not helping now. Now, this may or may not be true. I know his main funders, though, have connections all through the ultra-nationalists. You have to understand the actual political sort of scene in Ukraine. It would be as if in the U.S., there are the 3%ers and Patriot Front, and they're the right. and then the MAGA people, and they're the left. And then outside of that, there's a lot of communists and stuff, but they're not within power. So just to let you know, like, that's sort of where things are. So a lot of these people interconnect with each other.
We ran off. I wasn't listening to the past couple of sentences because I don't think they were
That's
relevant.
right.
to what we're talking
Listening's
about.
hard, dude. It's
No,
hard. That's
well,
how you learn.
It can be hard because
So,
I have to keep up with the jibber jabber.
These are
you know?
complex things, so you got to stay focused.
Yeah, I agree. You really should, because you keep wandering off. I don't. I'm not saying I don't trust you, but I was kind of curious about this narrative, so I looked up this Euromaidan or Revolution of Dignity thing, and I'm really curious about this. So it seems that there were about 25,000 Euromaidan protesters present. Were those all right sector?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
No,
I'm just curious.
in
No,
order
wait. That's
He's not going to let him give the context because he's trying to imply that it takes everyone there or a majority there to make it a coup, when it absolutely does not. Where the majority of the people, I'll use his example at January 6th, were the majority of them murderers? No, but someone got murdered, right? Doesn't add up.
so I was just asking
In
for
order to-
information. That's
right,
fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
no,
let
I'm
you
just
go.
curious. Because I don't know, right? I'm learning today.
Right. No, they
Um,
weren't. But those were the
right.
ones who escalated it into a violent coup, which is why the US NGOs realized, like, needed to make bedfellows with the most horrible people in Ukraine.
Of course.
Right, which is what they
So-
do pretty much every time, because the only way to turn the protest violent into something that could actually oust the Ukrainian government was to support these groups who were willing to, say, shoot people with sniper rifles and
You're
square.
doing it again. But we'll get to that because that's a little bit down. So of
Well, I
course
got to
there was a
fully
big
flesh out
protest.
these answers because they're not just simple.
Flesh
You know,
takes
you
time
can't
to
do it a
build,
sentence at a
You're in the
time.
womb for 9 months, all right? Now this call is not going to last that long, but we have time to build this out. Don't worry. So Yanukovych fled. He fled, of course, because the parliament building had been seized. You know, there was like shooting at the Capitol and stuff. We can litigate the exact details of that. But it seems that after that happened, the person who was put in power after Yanukovych fled, sort of the next in line, as I understand it, like he was just the next big guy. And then after that, they resumed.
Just the next big guy isn't the case, right? He's acting as if the leadership was not approved explicitly by these neo-Nazi groups. It was. It's sort of, to use January 6th again, right? Trump was the next guy in line, wasn't he? Or whatever. If they would have won, it would have been them putting the next guy in line in office, right? Because he's the next guy in line, you have to know the context that Eddie's been trying to give about the political situation in Western Ukraine.
The traditional democratic process. Normally, a coup means you put your guys in charge, but the right sector didn't put anyone. There wasn't an actual leader chosen by a group of violent protesters or a militia group. Unlike, by the way, the Donbass, where the Luhansk and Donetsk autonomous spheres have been undemocratically controlled by military leaders. How can this be a coup if they just resumed the normal democratic process?
They did not resume.
I mean, it's not a normal democratic
at all.
process for them to say we're not handing back the government buildings until you dismiss the democratically elected leader Yanukovych. That is a coup. But like I said, it's more useful to have somebody like Poroshenko who's more center right by Ukrainian standards, which are extremely far right, who will allow them to act with impunity and do what they want, but who isn't openly an ethno-nationalist themselves, who gives the face of wanting peace and wanting to end the civil war, espally before the Russian special military operation began.
How did they?
These leaders really want, Ukraine, the ethno-nationalists in Ukraine didn't want, to draw a whole bunch of global attention. Well, that's hard. Never mind. I'll take back my last sentence.
Yeah, no, I get it. So how did they put a guy in charge, though?
They said
that isn't. So you see what he's doing again? He's trying to lead it in a certain way by making this statement that they put a guy in charge and then trying to force Eddie to defend it, which is why Eddie's like, wait a minute. And like, look at his face right now. He's like, hold on, something's not right here. And it's just another sleazy tactic. They didn't put a guy in charge. The whole point was to get Yanukovych out, and the next guy was their guy.
Seized hold of the government buildings and instead until, like that quote I just read from you, and said, until you put somebody in charge who we are okay with, who ended up being Poroshenko, who had increasingly for years been shifting right and moving right for mostly for political reasons to try and appeal to these groups who were gaining a lot of power in Ukraine. They said, until you put in a leader that we're okay with, like Poroshenko, we're going to maintain hold of these buildings, the ethno-nationalist right sector.
So are you suggesting that the entire government of Ukraine kowtowed to occupying protesters? How many right sector people, like the entire, like, wait, I'm just so I fully understand. You're
another lie.
Suggesting that the guy that was in charge after Yanukovych, who was like the next in line because he had the most proportional support in the parliament after Yanukovych and such, who was only in charge for, I think, 8 months before they resumed normal democratic elections, the right sector somehow made that guy the guy?
Yeah, by seizing the government buildings, by escalating the protests into a violent coup, seizing hold of the major government buildings in Kiev, and saying until you put in power
in Kiev, it's a big
city. Until you put, well, I don't know, a lot of the major government buildings in Kiev, until you put in power a leader that we're okay with. And, you know, Ukraine had been, you know, like I said, ethno-nationalism and far-right politics have been a problem in Ukraine for a while. So there are a lot of members in parliament and a lot of politicians in Ukraine who lean towards, you know, center-right or far-right politics. So there were a lot of better options for right sector in these ethno-nationalist groups, such as Poroshenko. Yanukovych wanted to get rid of the language laws. He wanted to remove Stepan Bandera as a national hero, who was then re-implemented.
Wait, we're running ahead. We're running ahead again. I was just asking
because these are important. You asked me how right sector seized control of the government.
No.
And I'm explaining how.
No, you misunderstand. First of all, you weren't telling me how they seized control. You were telling me how they used that control to get a person in charge. Second,
Jesus.
of all, you're telling me what they said, but people say lots of stuff. If I went over with a microphone to say the January 6th protests, right, and I put my microphone up to a bunch of people and asked them, you know, what are you here for? I would get a wide range of things, many of them delusional perspectives, threats, expectations. They say they're not going to leave until a suitable leader is chosen. But the leader that got chosen was the next up guy. So couldn't
it was their guy. Well, it was the guy who was going to allow them to act with impunity. It was the anti-Russian guy.
It was well, I mean, at this point now, all of Ukraine's government
and
is
also let me say that was the leader and the founder of.
You're getting the timeline wrong. I think you're confused about the timeline, Vish. No, at this point, all of Ukraine was not anti-Russia. Ukraine is a very large country, and most of the East is Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian, etc. This is before the special military operation, right? It is the neo-Nazis leading the way in anti-Russian sentiment in alliance with Western NGOs that fund them, that spread that propaganda, just like they do here, right? It's about who has the funding to spread a message. This is basic media literacy, right? The more money you have, the louder your microphone is. And if you have the Open Society Foundation, the NED, etc., pouring money into these neo-Nazi groups, then their voices get very loud. At the same time, you have Ukrainian oligarchs doing the same thing. Anyway, back to the timeline thing. He's a little confused on the timeline here.
Right sector who said that. It wasn't just some random Trump supporter.
Sure, leaders of far right groups known for their sane statements.
Organized this and was able to seize hold of the government building.
You're still misunderstanding.
It would be like if January 6th protesters actually seized hold of the Capitol and Trump came out and said, you know, we're not gonna let go of the Capitol until you put in power, you know, someone that we want.
It seems like, from what I'm looking at right now, the goal of the Euromaidan protesters were to oust Yanukovych, and the guy that got put in after Yanukovych was the obvious next person because.
Yep, that's correct. And the people doing it, those leading the charge, were neo-Nazis. And the person they put in was sympathetic and would let the neo-Nazis run things. Those aren't conflicting things, right? And they also said some really gross stuff about if it weren't for the neo-Nazis, Maidan would have been blah, blah, blah. You guys keep watching for a second. I just got to run out. I got to do a quick thing for work, and it'll take 2 seconds.
He was the one with the no support. He was literally the opposition party. And he was only in charge for a little bit, and then the normal democratic process resumed. The reason this is interesting to me is because when I think coup, I've read about a lot of coups. The United States loves doing them, huh? You should read about that sometime. It's crazy how bad this government gets.
But when I got to read about coups. You're right.
Yeah,
you have not watched our content, have you?
When we do, no, I haven't. Normally when I read about coups, like, what does that mean? It usually means like the authoritarian, like, placing of a leader in power, not just one leader gets ousted and then the normal process resumes for everything after that, which is what happened. The fill-in was the next up. And then after
they
that, the
banned the
elections
Russian
happened.
language and started to ban opposition media and Lugansk and Donetsk declared themselves independent republics, and there was essentially a war going
Wait,
on.
what does that
So
happen?
it's not like things just went back to normal after they ousted
No,
the
I
democratically
agree.
elected
Russia
leader.
made things way worse. I fully agree with that. But that doesn't change the fact
That's
that
not what I said.
that's what I heard. It's what you implied,
Well, you
right?
have selective hearing, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, we can
Everything's
get back
Russia
to that.
bad.
So it seems like this coup was really just the ousting of Yanukovych. You've talked about how like the far right has been controlling Ukraine by putting their guys in power. I don't really think that's demonstrated by the evidence we have.
Did you know the real cause of your hair loss?
I apologize about the ads, guys.
It is actually due
I'm
to your
old
scalp
and
environment.
technology and ad blockers confused.
I mean, you also
Right.
acknowledge that a lot of the Euromaidan protesters weren't even far right. What proportion of the 25,000 were right sector? When I take a look
The
at
ones who are
polls,
shooting people and the ones who organized themselves and seized power of government buildings,
numerically a
and
proportion.
then demanded that the politics then play out the way
He's
that they
acting
wanted.
as if
Well,
numerical.
the way that they
And
were
I mean,
going to
what-
anyway
what-
after the ousting of
not.
Yanukovych, right? Like after
do you-
Yanukovych get ousted, what happened
and also,
was like the
how
normal
familiar are you
result.
with color revolutions in East Europe? Because you say that coups are always, just the authoritarian, whatever that means. I mean, we should lay out what authoritarian means concretely, but the
Go
coup
ahead.
has to be the placing of a leader in power. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that U.S. coups are carried out. And a lot of times it's very subversive. It's very underhanded. It's not just the U.S. coming in, the CIA coming in, like, what they did in 1951 in Iran, getting rid of Mossadegh and putting in power who they want. A lot of times it involves finding the actors on the ground who are going to allow U.S. interests to be carried out. So that's what the U.S. found in these banderites in Ukraine, which is why they've supported them since World War II, and why they found them very useful. So there's all sorts of ways that color revolutions and coups happen, and this is just a perfect example of one. It actually parrots
A color revolution
a lot
is
of the
when a
other color
country
revolutions, including
likes
the Orange
people?
Revolution in Ukraine. What?
A color revolution is when a government likes people.
A color revolution is essentially a coup.
Well, that's a circular definition if ever I heard one. I was asking, I think people of color should be able to do their revolutions if they want. We're all equal.
That's
What's the
a color revolution is just a term for like when U.S. NGOs back certain groups who then overthrow a government, which works in the U.S.'s interest.
Oh yeah, that's happened for
It
sure. I've
doesn't
read
mean
about
that
those.
people of color are doing it.
I
And
know
trust
that-
me, the neo-Nazis who took over
that was a
Ukraine
bit.
were not people of color. And
Well,
they don't like people of color.
The original Nazis probably would consider them people of color, which is kind of funny when you think about the way Nazi ideology shifts and molds to suit the needs of the people who use it for power.
Looks a little bit like it's slipping out that he knows they're neo-Nazis there, doesn't it?
Yes,
Like those
I agree,
Banderite types, right? No, I fully agree. They're bad. I just don't know if they've had as much influence over the way things have petered out as you suggest they have. Not to speak of this nebulous claim of U.S. support. Now, would the U.S.
Right here, he is contradicting what he said earlier. It's just lie after lie after lie with this guy.
support the Euromaidan protesters, considering Yanukovych is, let's say, Russia-friendly? Sure, fully, of course. I'm sure there were plenty of U.S. politicians, leaders, maybe even celebrities. George Clooney going down to Kiev to say, protest, get that Yanukovych guy out of here.
Not just celebrities. Our politicos went and handed out cookies to neo-Nazis.
I don't know if that in and of itself can be fairly called like a coup or a color revolution, though, right? Because if that's the case, it seems like everyone's color revolutioning everyone all the time whenever there's civil unrest.
Well, it wasn't just blanket U.S. support. There was a leaked phone call from Jeffrey Pyatt and Victoria Nuland where they're talking about the different actors in Ukraine and essentially plotting out together how they can escalate the protests into the actual violent overthrow of a government. So it's been very conniving and very strategic from the U.S. every step of the way. It's not just a blanket support. As I said, they've supplied
what came of that?
Logistics and information and political support for these groups as well. Based on the changing situation in Ukraine. It's not just funneling arms and weapons into these preferred groups, which is basically what it became after the war. Now the U.S. is just funneling money and arms into Ukraine as our country crumbles here at home.
Okay, wait.
Damn straight, Eddie.
Before that, it was
We're still in 2014.
strategic.
We're still in 2014.
Eddie's building his case and talking about things that matter. So Vish is going to have to pull it back and talk about a bunch of nonsense.
Hold on. What came of that phone call? It's like a call in and of itself is. I mean, who?
And you know what? I'll talk about it. They send all this money to these neo-Nazis, these doctrinaire neo-Nazis. Well, our working class is struggling more and more every day. It's absolutely disgusting. And every single bourgeois politician who does it is aiding a Nazi. I mean, what do you call that besides global fascism? Right? So for that, I don't want to get started.
Who among us hasn't had a call with our friends saying, I think we should plot to overthrow Yanukovych? I'm sure
Well,
lots of people have done this. What
I
came of
can't
it?
say I've ever had a call where I plot out what's going to happen with Ukraine's government. I think that's exclusive to Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, Victoria Nuland has been overseeing U.S. policy in Ukraine for a long time.
Well, what did they
One of the
do?
most powerful people in the U.S. in relation to Ukraine. What was that? Sorry.
But what did they do?
You wanna pull up the call right now? I have it.
No. The call is a call. I mean, what did they do?
Funneled money into preferred groups via NGOs and groups like the CIA cut out the NED, and actually the CIA themselves.
Note right there that he said the NED and CIA
have been involved in this too.
What
What
groups do they
preferred
support?
groups, incited those groups to violence, and escalated the protests and the civil unrest to the point where these U.S.-backed groups could oust Yanukovych, who, like you said, the U.S. didn't like, which allowed the U.S. to begin building up military and arms in Ukraine.
Okay,
which is part of NATO's broader effort, their broader strategy to attack Russia, which they've admitted openly. That's what they're doing right now.
Now I have more questions than I have answers. I still don't know what exactly
it's a complicated issue, isn't it?
I fully agree. Right? Help elucidate for me.
Yeah.
With regards to the money being funneled and so on, like what did they actually? I mean, like in a direct sense, right? Because I want to keep things really concrete because I know there's a lot of broad conspiracism when it comes to color revolution talk. I'll tell you an example. Okay, here. Okay.
More lies through language. Imagine that. Trying to frame it with conspiracism. It's so sleazy.
U.S. history, right? Now, a lot of people back during the civil rights movement said that Malcolm X, especially Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., were actually Soviet-backed infiltrators who were trying to destabilize the United States. Now, this is false, of course, but it turns out, and we know this through historical.
Actually, it's not false. Backed is a big word, but there were a ton of Communist Party interactions and stuff like that. And the Soviet Union absolutely funneled money into revolutionary movements in the US and other countries. And here's what a lack of class analysis will do for Vaush, right? What is the class character of these actions going on? The case of the Soviet Union, it is the proletariat helping on an international scale a less powerful proletariat. The case of Ukraine and us, it is our bourgeoisie directing the affairs of another nation's bourgeoisie in their own interests. It is the proletariat whose material interests represent the material interests of all of humanity, which is why they're aligned. And we can get into how that is, but that's not really the point. The bourgeoisie, however, especially in this globalized era, have conflicting interests a lot of the time, right? So there, you really got to understand the class character of everything.
Records, there actually were a decent number of people pushing civil rights in the U.S. who had ties to Soviet Russia. They were not insubstantial ties either. Now, I think that's fine because shit, I like civil rights. Get your money where you need to, King. Literally.
Guarantee you, if that was happening right now, he would be talking negatively about it in some way.
We need some civil rights in here. But do you think a person
like clearly this isn't the case, but say there was, some Communist Party of China members who were funding Midwestern Marx, right? This year would be talking about how those evil authoritarian Chinese are funding the evil tankies and they just hate America. It's so dumb.
Today could then fairly say that the U.S. civil rights movement was a color revolution meant to coup the culture of the United States from the Soviet Union? Or would it be more nebulous?
No, I think if a bunch of German fascists in 1940
he sticks to it.
Overthrew their seized U.S. government buildings and said, if you don't dismiss our democratically elected leader, a bunch of U.S. fascists who were being backed by Germany, rather, seized hold of the White House and said, if you don't dismiss Franklin Delano Roosevelt and put in power someone who's more fascistic, more right-leaning, we're going to keep hold of the government buildings. That would be a color revolution.
Then I've got it. I've got an example.
I wouldn't say the Soviets funneling some money into civil rights equals a coup.
I've got it then. I've got it. Not a successful one, but January 6th. We know for a fact, thanks to a Senate investigation, that the Russian government actually did deliberately promote accounts and interests that were involved in the organization of January 6th. And a lot of people who have since been arrested.
Oh, God, he's Russiagating. He's Russiagating. Russiagate has been so thoroughly exposed by this time that, come on, oh my goodness, you cannot compare the NED and Open Society Foundation and all these NGOs funding literal doctrinaire neo-Nazis to Russian troll farms, of which there were like 2 very minor ones that weren't their government, weren't connected to their intelligence agencies, nothing. Jesus.
Indicted, whatever else. You know, there are of course multiple people on Trump's team who had connections to Russia to the point where it's gotten them indicted and or arrested. That would be an attempt at a color revolution. Russia tried to color revolution us. They didn't succeed, but do I have it right? Do I got it now?
I'm not educated enough on January 6th to comment, honestly. But you should send me.
That is awesome. When you don't know something enough about something or whatever, absolutely nothing wrong with just going, I don't know enough about that, really. I wish more people did that.
The thing about Russia funding people on January 6th. I would say that January 6th pales in comparison to Maidan, which lasted for months and had far more funding from Western NGOs than I'm assuming January 6th. I don't know how much Russia pushed into
where'd the
it,
funding come from?
Russia wasn't able to turn January 6th, into like the sniper attacks in Maidan Square killed dozens of people, right? How many people died on January 6th? I believe it was one of the protesters, right? These are not comparable events.
There was a cop and a couple of people. I think one guy died of a heart attack.
Right. So that's not comparable to, say, a fascist group burning dozens of trade unionists alive, right? In a major symbolic trade union building and then marching on the government and seizing power of it and saying, if you don't dismiss the president of the country and send him into exile, we're just going to keep hold of the government, right? That's not what happened on January 6th.
I'd still like it, though.
I don't say it's good, just being realistic.
So in terms of the threshold for a color revolution, right? The U.S. has money everywhere because we're the wealthiest country on earth. There are NGOs and private actors all around the world, literally everywhere, who have connections to U.S. businesses, even those that operate in line with government interests. So I think, like, we want to be specific here, because if you want to say, well, U.S. money was involved in Euromaidan, U.S. money was involved in everything, like literally everything. There's not a conflict on earth you can't find U.S. money. I want to know what specifically. You say that they were being funded through NGOs. So was the State Department like specifically allotting money to a group of like CIA associated NGOs to go to like the right sector? How did they facilitate this?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the exact details, but that's why things like the leaked phone call help, where Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt are literally talking about, okay, here's the situation in Ukraine. Who do we funnel money into now so that we can see our interests carried out? And I mean, to ignore that NATO has marched eastward and has made it their goal to threaten and attack Russia.
So you've more evidence
to be ignorant.
You've more evidence.
So we know. So let me
call,
finish.
right?
Though we know that this is part of the U.S.'s broader strategy, right? We know that it's their project to attack Russia. We know that the CIA has supported ethno-nationalists in Ukraine since World War II to do this, right? Now we have a leaked phone call as U.S. NGOs are very active in Ukraine and as Maidan is going on and it's becoming increasingly violent. There's a phone call between the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine where they're talking about reorganizing Ukraine's government, how to control Ukraine's government. And this isn't some just random person in the U.S. This is Victoria Nuland, the person overseeing U.S. foreign policy in Ukraine. Right, so the main U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, the main person overseeing U.S. foreign policy in Ukraine, is talking about how to reorganize Ukraine's government as U.S. NGOs are funneling money into their preferred groups that they have been propping up in this area forever.
And that's very concerning.
Going back to the thing Angela Merkel admitted, Angela Merkel said this: the U.S.'s goal and NATO's goal has always been to build up military in Ukraine so that they can attack Russia. Right, the coup fit right into their broader strategy,
Eddie.
Which is, I know you want me to just hyper focus on something.
Well, I mean,
right,
on
this
evidence
is part of a broader and a longer history,
a broad and very vague one.
And we need to bring in like evidence for the 2014.
Zing, got him.
Coup doesn't have to exclusively come from 2014.
I mean, you've laid out a pretty.
World War II.
No, I don't think money going to Ukraine in the 40s means that the U.S. orchestrated a 2014.
Can all you guys see how awesome and superior Vish is? Look how cool. I mean, I, for one, am incredibly impressed. Well done, Vish. You are so much better than everyone.
Coup. Wait, I'm so. You talked about
That's
this.
Not what I said. That's not what I said. I said that is a factor that matters.
So wait, Eddie, I'm trying to understand.
The historical development of Ukraine.
Eddie, I want to understand.
Led to 2014, Eddie, so we need to be certain, and we need to lay out the facts.
Eddie, please.
Leading up to that.
Please.
No.
Yes, Eddie.
To interrupt.
Okay. Well,
more using the volume in order to not allow him to make a point. What a sad, sad little rich kid.
Oh, wait. So the points being finished now, as they are, you have to tell me, you've made so many confident statements about the U.S. involvement in this. Then you just said we don't have the details. Do you have a detail? Any specific?
Yes. So you just hyper-focused on that part?
No. Like any.
Not what he said either, right? He said, no, we don't have all the details. Of course not. You never do. The idea that you do is ridiculous.
But you missed the,
literally
you ignored the part
any-
about the NGOs funneling money.
Yeah,
You missed the part
that's
about
what I'm
NATO
asking about.
training troops in
No,
Ukraine
no,
and
I'm
admitting
asking about
that
the
that's what they were
NGOs
doing. You
funneling
ignored
money.
the fact that
No,
Victoria
I'm
Nuland
not- no,
had a
I'm
leaked phone
asking-
call where she said where she talked about how she was reorganizing the government of
No,
Ukraine.
Eddie, I'm
how she was
asking you
involved in Ukraine
about that. I'm
and
asking you,
reorganizing their
Eddie,
government.
that
And
is
you
what I'm
ignored all of
asking
that
you about.
to hyper focus on the part where I said we don't know all of it.
No, Eddie, I'm asking you about the
but
money
I just gave you a whole
being
plethora
funneled
of evidence
through
of
NGOs.
U.S. involvement in Ukraine
Eddie,
in the lead up to the 2014 overthrow of
Eddie,
the government.
I just asked for any evidence and you got upset. I'm asking you for anything regarding the financial transactions.
You see what he's doing again?
I know about the phone call, but like anything, you're talking about, you spoke so competently on U.S. involvement and multiple fundings and right sector connections and so on. I know the U.S. has designs for Ukraine. We're an imperialist country. I fully believe that. But you've talked about it being a color revolution. And surely the fact that the United States has designs here can't mean it's a color revolution. If that's the case, then everything everywhere is a color revolution, because you know there are State Department ghouls drafting up plans for Botswana, like statehood one day, you know, just in case. There are people in the government doing all sorts of crazy stuff like that. It's the job of U.S. ambassadors to other countries to talk about our interests relative to their country. I just need something.
You see what he's doing here? He's explaining literally how this process happens and acting as if it's no big deal. No, it is a big deal. That's stepping on the sovereignty of other nations, right? Our ruling class does it all the time. It became the sort of major imperialist power in the last period of history, and it's ramping up these violent confrontations now as it begins decaying, right?
Specific, some CIA front that was set up in Ukraine that allowed them to funnel money, some like
that's the NED, which Eddie already said.
Evidence found there were like 16 SWAT SEAL teams that were at the Kiev on the day of the
and by the way,
actually they got found out really
I mean, there were the recent leaked documents showing the CIA's long and storied history in Ukraine, directly funneling money into preferred groups in the lead up to 2014. Also, we have the leaked documents from the kid who leaked the documents that he had access to on Discord.
What did we
show that
do?
U.S. special forces have been active in Ukraine. So that not only are there 200 plus NEDs in Ukraine,
so what do they do?
Who are giving political support and giving actual funding to the U.S. preferred groups and
where's the funding, Eddie? What funding? We don't have evidence of a single direct connection.
The NGOs,
which NGOs, Eddie?
The NED, which was created as a private CIA cutout because it's easier for.
Notice he just said the NED again.
Them to be clandestine about their activities.
I don't know how
which
NGOs
the U.S.'s preferred groups in Ukraine.
Okay,
giving support to them, and that was revealed.
Where's the evidence of that?
Showing Operation Cartel and Operation Aerodynamic.
Eddie,
this is the evidence. I'm telling you.
No, you're just telling. No, but like, where? Wait, do you think it's evidence when you say a thing happens?
I'll literally send you the articles right now.
Please, yes. Just any evidence of like leaked financial transactions or like direct engagement, something, because so far the only thing that you have evidence for is the fact that we wanted things in Ukraine, and we're America. We want the world, man. We want the moon. But that's not evidence of a color revolution. If a document leaked that the United States actually like really like it wanted the 2037 dissolution of Kazakhstan, and then it later happens, like you would need to connect something, something direct, something material. It's called material dialectics, right?
It's time for me to get set up for therapy, and I use this room.
Vaush has no idea what the materialist dialect.
And so when I
yes, you need to.
Look how pleased with himself he is. He said materialist dialectics. I'll gladly school him on it. He can take my class if he wants.
I'm trying to find something specifically about money being.
I know link hunting takes a second from talking. Do you want to move on, and then like if you find it, I can look at it then when you hit.
I'll just. Have you watched the movie Ukraine on Fire? Because that's where most of the evidence about the NEDs and the direct funneling of money.
I haven't. I can watch it though. Ukraine on Fire.
I didn't have any sources pulled up for today directly about NED money going directly to a group, although there are tons of specific cases, and there was the leaked documents that showed Operation Aerodynamic, where the CIA was directly giving money to preferred groups in Ukraine in the lead up to 2014, and the recent leaked Pentagon documents that shows U.S. Special Forces were involved in Ukraine. So that's a perfect example of the U.S. giving money to preferred groups in the lead up to the violent overthrow of this government. But if you watch this movie, Ukraine on Fire, it'll give much more evidence than that and lay out things in specific. It's very good.
Yeah, hold on. There's Oliver Stone interviewing pro-Russian figures surrounding the Revolution of Dignity, such as Viktor Yanukovych and Vladimir Putin. It interviews Yanukovych and Putin in a...
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. They got all sorts of direct interviews with people involved, and they have that leaked phone call from Victoria Nuland. And yeah, they have here a leaked speech of Victoria Nuland where she says that we have funneled $3 million into Ukraine in the last year alone to destabilize their politics. So she admitted that herself. So I forgot that was in this movie. So that's perfect for what you were asking.
Do you think it, out of curiosity, if somebody like me with no preconceptions about this conflict were to watch this, and I were to see that they were bragging about interviewing Yanukovych and Putin, do you think that might maybe lead me to believe this is a biased source?
Gotta love these sort of imperialism and Nazi apologists. They only care about bias when it doesn't agree with their preconceptions usually, but in the case of Vish, the story he wants to tell, right? He's fine reading any biased source from his thing, but anything else, it's biased. I can't believe that. What does that do, right? That keeps you away from anything that will ever question the narrative. And the narrative here is of our ruling class. And so if you say, yes, this is biased, of course it is. Everything in the entire world is biased. The sort of pomposity of the bourgeois ideological view that it can stand above bias and above ideology is just more, just more typical of these rich kids. Sorry, you're not without bias, Vish. Nobody's without bias. Anyone is smart enough to read something or watch something, understand its bias, and still think critically about it. Do you have that little faith in your own belief system, your own thoughts, etc., that a biased source is somehow going to turn everything around? Or is it that you've allowed your mind to shut because of this trigger word bias, and you refuse to believe it and you think it's all lies? It's very silly.
I feel like you should want to listen to the main people involved in the conflict. Like, what if we just bury our heads and not listen to Putin because we think he's a bad guy?
No. What if we listen to more than just one side?
No. They interview many pro-Ukrainian people too, right? It just features interviews with Putin and Yanukovych, which is interesting because
Vish is just about to say listen to more than one side, but he's the one refusing to do that.
Never get that perspective from Western media because they put you in an echo chamber where you don't even hear the Russian side. This movie allows you to hear the Ukrainian side and the Russian side and then make your decision.
What prominent pro-Ukrainian leaders do they interview for this film?
There's a few, by the way.
There's Klitschko. There's a handful of the leaders of like Right Sector and
the situation.
I believe there's interviews with Poroshenko.
Highly recommend
give it a watch.
You'll
learn, like for real, if you are genuinely interested in learning about this conflict, this movie is the best way.
Context, everything.
Yeah,
I can see why there were gaps in the timeline I got from you. It says starring Oliver.
You see the little jab? Gaps in the timeline. The only gap that I'm aware of is the one that Vish purposely danced around, which is the Odessa massacre, being a sort of sign for the progressive forces that it was time.
Oliver Stone, of course, Vladimir Putin, Yanukovych, Vitaly Zakhar. Oh, that's tough for me to pronounce. Vitaly Zakharchenko. There we go. I hope that was okay. And Robert Earl Perry.
Robert Perry's the man, by the way.
You like him? Oh, okay. It's interesting. The starring section doesn't seem to feature. Let me see. Who's this Zakharchenko person? Previously served as Ukraine's Minister of Internal Affairs until he was suspended from his duties on the 21st of February 2014, shortly after signing a decree authorizing the use of live ammunition against protesters. Oh. None of the pro-Ukrainian people you mentioned are in the starring feature of this film.
These ads, I apologize, everybody. I really do. I'm not that good at this stuff yet.
I guess I can give it a look and also listen to the guy who was ousted.
I mean, even if there wasn't, wouldn't it be interesting to hear the other side, since like we're blasted in the West with, the pro-NATO, pro-Western narrative? Like you even say they don't interview Poroshenko or they don't interview any Ukrainian leaders in this movie, which they do, right? Wouldn't you still want to hear
well,
from the other side?
do you think that would be an
Of
argument in
course.
favor of like watching, say, not to compare Russia and Nazis, I'm not saying they're the same, but in terms of people I disagree with, right? There are Nazi propaganda films and it's like, oh, well, this is the side of things they won't tell you. And that's usually because they're lying and awful, right?
Right. That's not what this film is. It's very good. It
Okay.
gives you both sides, and it features interviews with independent journalists as well as a plethora of sources.
Wait a minute here. Why is it usually because they're lying? I don't get that at all. Where does he get that?
And it features a lot of
on,
interviews,
I-
videos, and talks from people like Victoria
I'm sorry, my wife was being awesome and bringing me another cup of coffee because I ran out. Let me rewind that a minute.
I mean, even if there wasn't, wouldn't it be interesting to hear the other side, since like we're blasted in the West with, the pro-NATO, pro-Western narrative? Like you even say they don't interview Poroshenko or they don't interview any Ukrainian leaders in this movie, which they do, right? Wouldn't you still want to hear
Well,
from the other side?
do you think that would be an argument in favor of like watching, say, not to compare Russia and Nazis, I'm not saying they're the same, but in terms of people I disagree with, right? There are Nazi propaganda films and it's like, oh, well, this is the side of things they won't tell you. And that's usually because they're lying and awful, right?
Right. That's not.
See, why is this usually because someone is lying and awful that it's a side that they won't tell you? I think this is part of, the class nature of these sort of propagandists. Lenin writes that until we look for the class interests behind every slogan, every phrase, every institution, and every political policy, we will be the foolish victims of deception and self-deception in politics, right? Meaning, look at the class nature of who is telling you this rather than bias, right? It serves a class interest no matter what it is. And so for him to sort of dismiss things based on him not already agreeing with it, he can never possibly entertain any ideas outside of his preconceptions, which is why he has to, dismiss Putin later as irrational, because it's outside of what is acceptable for him to think and say, right? I've read all sorts of stuff that I agree with and disagree with. I've watched Vaush, right? I've read Mussolini. I've read Hitler. I've read all these things, and I've read them and therefore know the falsehoods. I know the contradictions with him. I'm not just dismissing it because I didn't previously think of it. That's so absurd. If you really think about that and that notion, it becomes childish right away.
What this film is. It's very good.
Okay.
It gives you both sides, and it features interviews with independent journalists as well as a plethora of sources. And it features a lot of interviews, videos, and talks from people like Victoria Nuland, who have been, deeply involved in controlling Ukrainian politics and orchestrating the coup. So it's also, it interviews and talks about and lets people who I deeply, vehemently disagree with on the pro-NATO side, it gives them a platform to talk as well. And then, like I said, it lets people make their decision. Yeah,
That's a great way to do it. I just want to finish my thought from before. If we only think of things and allow things into our sort of zone, read things, watch things, etc., that agree with our preconceptions, we have to ask the question, where do our preconceptions come from? Right? And then that quote I brought up from Lenin comes into play. Well, where do we go? We go to bourgeois schools. We see bourgeois media, right? That's all what informs our preconceptions. To really understand things, we need to think critically about them. And for me, the best way to do that is to use the Marxist outlook and method, right? That's why we teach it at the Institute. I guarantee you, though, while Vaush will claim that he knows what that is, he does not.
I'm sure there's a narrative, right? They're the movie's clearly in favor of the idea that the U.S. Helped orchestrate a coup in 2014, because that's what the evidence on the ground shows. But it's more so that the movie just presents the evidence rather than it tries to shove this narrative down your throat. They certainly don't portray Putin in a glowing light, which I wouldn't either, obviously. So.
Yeah, I have some mild criticisms of him. That's
Cobra Commander brings up a good point there. We call that Jewish.
say
Sorry,
based on the
bad
little that
joke.
I've learned today. I was also looking at this call between Pat and Nolan. There's quite a lot of text here. It's really hard to read and talk at the same time. Is there any content to this? Like, where do they say, like, I have, you know, like, I have done X? It seems like a lot of this I'll just have to watch the movie on.
Yeah,
so I feel like there should be some
the phone
evidence on
calls in
this.
the movie. We could play it now, but I mean,
That would take a little while.
it would be a little bit boring. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here.
I think the guy Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the government experience. What we need is Klitsch and Tiani Hook on the outside. So they're orchestrating a coup, orchestrating the violent seizure of this government by picking out their players.
Ohio State
And then you
residents,
funnel money
if you
to
have a
those
utility meter
organizations
like this
and
on
let
the
them
side
do
of your
their
house,
thing.
you can
I
get
think
paid.
this tries to
So yeah,
imply
we don't have to go into the
that, you know, it's like all paid actors and doing things against what they actually think. It's not how it works. These NGOs fund groups already existing on the ground. They increase tensions already existing on the ground.
call specifically.
Right,
Let's
there's
watch the
always
movie.
so much to
We
get
can
into, right?
revisit. it
I can
another
watch the
time if
movie
you
as
want
well.
to. I know we've been going for a while now.
Yeah. So, well, okay. So we've talked a lot about 2014. You know, it was a great year. I was 3 years out of high school. I don't know what I was doing in 2014 but
Oh God!
so we're in the modern day.
2014?
All right.
You
Now I
didn't
hear a lot
really
about
know.
this NATO group. Now
Yes.
I know that
Very
in the
important.
past people have said we're not going to move NATO over that far. Personally, I don't care. People say everything every direction. What I care about is what's morally right now. You know, if we listen to every promise, right? You know, I'm pretty sure that like Lincoln said, you know, we will promise you freedom from slavery, but not equality for the N-word, or whatever he went on about. Right? If we follow every promise ever made, it's like, well, okay, I don't know. Maybe we should reevaluate. So in terms of this NATO thing, okay. NATO, maybe they've done some bad stuff. Some people have said the opposite. I don't really know. But countries that want to join NATO asked to join NATO. Ukraine has asked to join NATO multiple times. We keep saying no because there's an internal conflict, and that is one of the prerequisites is that a country has to be stable in order to join NATO. Now, I guess my question is, doesn't it kind of validate the desire that Ukraine had to enter NATO that Russia would go on to invade them? Because the whole thing they wanted to be in NATO for was protection from Russia. Because
That's not true. A lot of it's based on the EU as well and wanting to join the EU. And that was continually floated as well. Russia was not going to attack unless there was a threat to it, right? And the NATO forces doing all of this was a direct threat to its statehood. It repeatedly said, no NATO forces on our borders. There is absolutely no way our ruling class would put up with Russian or Chinese soldiers training the Mexican army, making them interoperable with the Chinese and Russian militaries or the Canadians or anyone around us. It would not happen. They would invade. This is just a reality of how things work.
Russia can't invade a NATO country, obviously. That'd be a
Right. The argument
idea.
from Russia was that if Ukraine is allowed to join NATO, the U.S. is going to, and their NATO allies are going to use that as a launching point to attack us, which could escalate towards nuclear war. Now, you could, debate whether that's correct or not until Angela Merkel came out and admitted in 2014 that there was never any plans to follow Minsk agreements. The whole idea was for NATO to build up military forces and military capacity in Ukraine with the explicit purpose of threatening and attacking Russia.
Wait, what does that
So
have to
the
do with
explicit
Minsk?
purpose, according to NATO leaders, was to build up military capacity and attack Russia.
So
it's perfectly reasonable for Russia to say that's a red line.
well-
If Ukraine joins NATO, we're going to do something.
So
Because we know that means attack for us, which Joe Biden himself, like I said, not that we have to believe everything he says, but he himself said that he knows this. If NATO moves eastward anymore, we're going to provoke a potential nuclear war.
So
with
yeah,
Russia.
let's
Which
talk.
would be catastrophic. I think we both agree.
Right. Well, it's just obviously we can debate whether or not Ukraine being part of NATO would work as a staging ground to attack Russia, which seems like a dumb thing.
Someone in the chat said something interesting. Also, who cares if the U.S. wouldn't let Mexican troops get Chinese trading? If they invaded over that, they would be wrong. Well, what's right and wrong is a subjective thing, right? Countries do not operate on right and wrong. They operate on material class interests, right? The US, for example, is interested in Ukraine because of its strategic location. Energy sales from Russia into Europe go through there, right? That's why the US blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And not only that, everything that's ever invaded and gotten into actual Russia has had to go through Ukraine. If you look at a map, it makes a lot of sense. But that's a good question. Good thinking.
We don't have to debate that because Angela Merkel admitted it, right?
Okay.
The leaders of NATO admitted this. They said it was just a way to attack Russia.
So wait, we'll get to that. I'm going to ask. I'm leading into that.
Going on the training up of NATO troops right on Russia.
Right, we'll get into that. So a couple of things. First of all, Russia did invade Ukraine, so that side of the thing is kind of settled. It's really ambiguous whether, like, you could argue we would have gone into Russia, but like we know Russia did go into Ukraine, so that's settled. So the desire for Ukraine to join NATO, like that is at least from Ukraine's perspective, that's a solid thing to get at right there.
No. That is not solid because of that. It was NATO and Ukraine doing what they did that prompted Russia to invade. It is very clear, and Vaush knows this. Again, there's another lie. I don't know what we're at. We have to be at least 40 by now.
I can't blame them for wanting that, especially in retrospect. But the thing, okay, so this Merkel thing, you said,
what's the one question I get asked the most? What pants do you use
sorry.
at home?
I feel bad
Well, today,
about
there was never an intention to follow the Minsk agreements, something NATO troops in Ukraine, which confused me. The Minsk Accords were an unsuccessful attempt, there were two, to stop the fighting between the Russian-backed separatists and Ukraine's government. But what does that have to do with putting NATO troops into Ukraine? We couldn't move troops into Ukraine. They weren't a part of NATO. Like, if we weren't following, if Ukraine and Russia kept fighting, it would prolong the conflict that prevented Ukraine from entering NATO.
So they don't actually have to be a part of NATO to train up troops. So what was going on was the Minsk Accords were framed as a peace agreement, a way to end the fighting. But as Angela Merkel has now showed us, it was not. It was a way for NATO to build up military capacity. So despite not adding Ukraine to NATO, they were training up troops right on Russia's border, thousands of troops to be NATO interoperable, which means those troops can go anywhere in the earth where NATO troops are stationed, and they can work together. They can be in the same battalion. They're trained up to NATO standards, which is very high standards. So Russia then began, lining up troops along their border.
Wait, how many NATO troops do we have in Ukraine?
So the point is, I just want to be clear here. My point is,
this part is kind of irritating, right? So how many troops did NATO have in Ukraine? He's trying to explain, right, what interoperable means. That's incredibly important. Not to mention that it came out that these special forces that were training the Ukrainian neo-Nazi armed forces were literally telling them, don't worry, if Russia attacks, we got your back. America's going to be here for you. And oh man, can you think about the actual soldiers who believed that, right? Who are under these misconceptions that think this. And then also think about the ruling class, like just cynically doing that. It's really just on all sides of it gross.
Despite Ukraine not being added to NATO, NATO was still building up military capacity in Ukraine. And the point of that was to eventually attack Russia and eventually probably add Ukraine to NATO, which they kept floating.
Okay, here's another part where Vaush is going to lie. See, Eddie's talking about how Ukraine is going to be used and is used as a way of attacking Russia. There are all manners of attacks. Blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline is an attack, right? Training these neo-Nazis to be interoperable with NATO troops is an attack. It doesn't necessarily have to be soldiers with NATO written on their arm walking into Russia to be an attack. And he's going to flip this and change the context from Eddie's general statement of an attack to the particular statement of NATO troops invading. And that's yet another lie.
How many NATO troops did we have in Ukraine?
It was thousands. Not NATO troops, sorry. They were training Ukrainian troops to be NATO interoperable.
Okay,
so
well,
they could launch military operations alongside NATO, which, as Angela Merkel said, would
Hold on 1 second. Do we have bots in here? I noticed a few, and there's like people like this saying, come on, dude, you lost, learn from it and be it. Can the bot not tell that I'm not Eddie? Or Like, does it not have an algorithm to search for through our content for keywords to know about us very proudly saying we're communists? I don't even remember the last time I said leftists. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. That could just be someone who is confused, but seems weird to me.
You know, give them the ability to
Okay,
attack
it's a
Russia.
very different.
Use Ukraine alongside NATO troops
So
to attack Russia.
okay, so hold on. This doesn't make sense on a couple of levels. First of all, every country in the world, with the exception of those that don't like NATO, want NATO troops training their troops because we're NATO. I mean, we're the U.S., right? We're the best.
There are so many factors that would play into that decision. And here's just another part of the metaphysical world outlook that I don't think Vish can understand. He thinks in isolation, right? We need troops to be the best. So let's ask the best military to do it. And it's not NATO, by the way. It's specifically the US, and China actually is really, really advanced. But all that aside, there are so many factors that play into that, right? There's a realpolitik to everything. NATO training your troops means something in the world of geopolitics beyond just troops getting training. And that's the interconnection, the factors that make up facts and create how things form in the real world. It's just sort of the abstract world that the sort of pseudo-intellectual lives in.
I don't think every country in the world, I don't think Russia and China want that.
No, except for countries who don't like NATO. I mean, like, if you're not ideologically aligned against the
I
United
would say
States,
most of the
NATO,
world doesn't like NATO anymore after what they've been seeing.
you can
going
litigate that
on
if you like,
recently
but
in
there's no
Ukraine.
denying our military capabilities, right? We certainly have well-trained,
First of all, ours, I ain't got no military capabilities. The Western ruling class does, but they're my enemy, right? I don't like using our for that stuff. And it's telling that Vish does.
armed soldiers. That's not a moral
Yes,
statement.
which
I'm
is
just
why
talking about
Russia was
money.
threatened by
Right.
that NATO training.
So, okay. So NATO training Ukrainian troops. The reason that Ukrainian troops were being trained was because somebody started a war in the Donbass, and Ukraine, because it's a poor, at least it was a poor country,
You're getting the timeline wrong, Vish.
didn't have soldiers to fight against it. That's one of the reasons the Azov battalion grew to the prominence that it did. You have these like ultra-nationalist, like blood and soil types who form militias because Ukraine literally has no organized.
That's actually not true. He's trying to say there was no military beforehand. But anyway, we don't have to talk about that. It's kind of boring. I did notice the person I think might be a bot say something else. Now, this is interesting to me, and it's a good, even though said in that sort of middle-class way. By the way, before I get back to it, Eddie's face here is absolutely perfect. What if Russia could also act as an imperial power, though? Imagine. So it's just sort of like imagine a place of superiority that doesn't exist. But what is imperialism, right? Let's think about what imperialism is and how this whole narrative of inter-imperialist rivalry doesn't really add up. Imperialism is the monopoly stage of capitalism. Things that happen outside of that, it's not something so simple as a powerful nation or sort of military conflicts, etc., or using political power or military adventurism. None of that is imperialism. Imperialism gets to the root cause of anything happening within the imperialist nation, right? And when the US, a monopoly capitalist system, is acting in this way, yes, it is imperialism, but Russia does not have this system, right? Russia is sort of a national bourgeois system. And that's a really, really important distinction. It's also something that the world hasn't seen before because it's a counter-revolutionary state, post-socialism, that's sort of being forced into this place because of its antagonism with the imperialist countries of re-examining its socialist past, which I think is interesting. But I forget where I was going with that. Anyway, we did get a super chat. I don't know how to do this one, Sam. I'm so sorry. I'll just read it aloud. Gotta dip back to work, so see you. Also, is a class at 5 p.m. Eastern or Central. I want to make sure I'm on time. Too many viewings of this may debate become concerning for your health. Thank you so much, Sam. The class, the Basics of Marxism class, is at 5 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday. So we're going to go on with the debate.
Military to fight in the Donbass. Now, obviously, that doesn't make what they're doing right. I mean, I'm glad they're fighting against Russian aggression, but I don't agree with them being internationalists.
Like, do you really think the people of the Donbass were like about to march into Western Ukraine and start attacking them?
No, I think they were trying to secede with East Ukraine, which they did. That's what they tried to do. They had
Yeah. So you just said that these groups didn't have a lot of power in Ukraine.
We live in strange times.
These ethno-nationalist groups.
All right, gotta pause real quick. I promise I'll stop the pausing. I'm actually supposed to be at work right now. Shh, don't tell anybody. I gotta run out and do a quick thing. It'll take me 2 seconds. Keep watching.
They were able to seize hold of the Ukrainian government. Clearly, they had a lot of power.
No, they were able to seize
buildings.
buildings.
And then
wait, you're doing it again. We've gone over these points.
Shelling the homes. It was absolutely Western Ukraine.
We've gone over these points.
No, nationalists.
We're backsliding.
We're being offensive towards Eastern Ukraine.
We're backsliding.
Right?
No,
so you're making it seem like they were defending.
Stop reading.
Like the Azov and them are defending.
You're reading chat. I can see your pupils, man. Every time you talk at length, you go up and to the right.
Look at what I'm looking at.
Oh,
yeah,
tour.
that is literally a tick that I have when I'm thinking. Look,
are you accusing me of being ableist?
Look, there's maps up there. Do you think that's what I'm using?
Do you think?
What do you think I'm reading from?
Looking at the people of Africa and their anti-colonial spirit gives you strength.
Look, I have this article from Consortium News about there's Ukrainians marching with Stepan Bandera, and then there's you. Where's the script, Vaush? Where's the script that I'm
kind of taken aback by seeing myself there.
I wish I had.
I'll just assume you quickly closed it. We visited a lot of these points.
You can think whatever you want.
We were talking about.
I just know this issue well because I've actually read about it,
and I'm learning a lot about it today. This is my education.
Right.
So we don't want to relitigate here. We were talking about like NATO troops in Ukraine. It seems like there was a pretty good reason for the Ukrainian government to want their troops being trained up because of the whole war in the Donbass thing. So I want to know what was this plan to invade Russia? You said from Merkel, right? Merkel.
Yes, the
if
plan
I
was to build
Merkel,
up NATO capacity, military capacity in Ukraine,
invade
so
Russia.
It could be used to launch an attack against Russia, or even just to provoke and threaten Russia and contain Russia. Like the U.S. right now is surrounding China with their military bases to try and
China's completely
and trying to control countries around China, like Thailand, so that they can contain China, so that they can stop China from growing as an economic superpower. Which gets to the point of what this whole thing is about: is the U.S. doesn't want Russia to reassert themselves as a superpower after they essentially broke the Soviet Union in 1991.
Yes, I know that the U.S. deeply fears Russian economic hegemony. Hold on, I'm reading this.
Right. So the idea
thing.
was to build up NATO capacity in the region so that they had.
Oh, I'm sorry for the pause. I keep getting really good questions. Baby Marxist asks, Noah, would you consider Russia's anti-imperialist stance as aligned with the interests of the Russian bourgeoisie? So the Russian bourgeoisie is in an internal contradiction right now. The famous oligarchs, right, are very, very pro-NATO, pro-West, pro-neo-Nazi, anti-war. The more national bourgeoisie are not, right? So what happened was Putin sort of kneecapped the power of this oligarchy and forced the economy to begin working in this way of like beginning to make primary these nationalized major industries, or what used to be called the heights of economic power, like the state energy sector, right? It's sort of almost taking a page out of China's book. However, here's the thing. In China, the working class is in power. In Russia, it very much is not, even though the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is extremely powerful there. Don't forget that. And Putin has been forced to admit to the Communist Party and Zhuganov, their general secretary, that they're going to have to be talking about socialism in the upcoming years. So good question.
A foothold at a essentially neo-colonial outpost in Ukraine, which they could use to attack Russia.
Right. Okay. I'm trying to find that though. Hold on.
And I don't agree that the Ukrainian citizens would want to become part of NATO, because I think they're smart enough to know what that means. They're smart enough to know the target that puts on them from Russia, who have repeatedly in the lead up to 2014 said that adding Ukraine to NATO is a red line, right? We'll take that as an act of aggression and a threat towards us.
Wait, I can't
When speed matters, pay with PayPal. Trust the way you pay.
The fact is, 90% of hair loss cases in men are caused by scalp condition, which is the consequence of one bad habit.
So I think the
Find
people of,
her saying-
of Ukraine knew that becoming part of NATO would put a target on them.
I can't find the thing where she says that we're planning to attack Russia. Can you find that? What do I need to Google to find that? That's pretty important.
Oh God,
I'm sure
here's
I
the
have.
one.
Just
My
here's the
perspective
part
is that
where
it'd
he
be pretty
goes on
dumb to
and
attack
on
Russia for a
pretending
couple of reasons. First of all,
that he
it's
talked
broke.
about
It's not like there are much in
NATO
the way of material
invading
wealth to
Russia.
seize apart from
It's a
their
whole
natural
thing.
resources.
It's so
Second,
irritating.
it would prompt the end of the world. That's
Honestly,
not
if
good.
I
I've noted
wasn't
that
doing
on
this
my notes,
for
and it says that the
you
end of the
Yeah,
guys,
world
that's why
would
it's so
I would
fucking
be
insane, dude. That's why
fast-forwarding
I'm
through
so against this war and why I talk about it so
Me
much.
too.
Because they're literally provoking World War III. They're provoking nuclear destruction for all of us. That's why Merkel's
should stop.
statements were so insane. That's why it was
Can
such a
you
bomb.
find me those statements, please, where she
Yeah.
said that they were planning to attack Russia?
Yeah, hopefully I have it in my notes here.
I hope so too.
Again, we already explained what attack is, right?
See,
We
Merkel
already
invade
explained that
Russia,
him trying
war,
to sneak
Russia.
in NATO invasion is a lie. And it's very irritating. What he's going to do here is he's going to get a German newspaper and read a synopsis and act as if that is a direct quote. It is not, right? Let's be clear about that. And he's going to say, but Angela Merkel didn't say NATO was going to invade Russia, which Eddie never said, etc., etc.
Merkel interview Russia. It's a Washington Post article. I'll never give those freaks my money.
So I got two.
Somebody in my chat just said that I won't find it because it didn't happen.
Are you reading the chat? Oh my God, are you reading the chat right now?
But you'll prove them wrong, right?
Here you go.
Dude, Vish, I just saw your pupils. You're reading the chat. Ugh.
Okay.
Ugh.
There's an article from Patrick Lawrence on. I sent it to you on Zoom. That explains Merkel's revelations, which were a further escalation of the hostilities with Russia.
All right, hold on. Hold on. Consortium News.
I sent it to you in the chat.
I see. Yeah, I just want to see on the reliability scale. Let's see.
Reliability scale, another evidence of sort of pseudo-intellectualism of these pampered little rich kids, right? He can't be bothered to actually think critically and read something and then think about it, look up the sources, see if they add up, etc. He needs this bourgeois institution-based reliability scale to tell him if it will confirm his preconceptions for him and give him that little dopamine hit he needs when he gets to go, oh, yeah, I'm right? And then the truthometer, which who's deciding how reliable things are? The institutions giving you that truthometer or whatever the hell it is.
What's the reliability scale? Does that tell you how good sources are?
Oh, well,
how do you know that that's reliable?
Well, there's always going to be like that bias chain effect, but sometimes it's pretty easy to tell, right? Like Alex Jones or something. Stop clicking. Oh, this one says it has an extreme left bias with mostly factual reporting. Well, I consider myself extremely on the left.
I wonder why he even says he's extremely on the left. Like, even setting aside the sort of materialist view of what is left and what is right, every position he has aligns him with the ruling class. So even in the more conventional way, how is he not extremely reactionary?
I'm extreme. Let's go.
It's a great outlet. I recommend anybody follow it.
And Consortium News
one
is
of the
awesome.
main ways that I keep up to date with what's going on in the world.
Okay, let's see. Interviews.
It was founded by Robert Perry, actually, who we discussed earlier, and who's in that movie Ukraine on Fire.
How to escape the heat if you don't have
How
an
are
air
there like
conditioner.
a million ads right
This only takes 5 minutes.
I'm so sorry, everybody.
I'm sure I would like him a lot.
I'm going to have to make Eddie teach me how to get rid of them all.
Sorry, just a moment. This seems pretty important, so I want to cover it. Merkel's interviews with Der Spiegel. Oh, that's not a good look, being German. Right off the bat. Ukraine conflict.
That's kind of funny.
Something.
1 point for the rich kid. One. Just one.
Merkel described the Minsk talks as an attempt to give Ukraine time to become stronger. Okay. There are various interpretations of Minsk's remarks. They are generally taken at face value as an offhandedly delivered admission of her duplicity in her dealings with Russia on the Ukraine situation. Wait, that's it? For saying the Minsk agreements would give Ukraine more time to fortify? Wait.
Notice the lies through language here, right? It goes from, well, first it says what she actually said was more time to prepare for, I think, war or violent confrontation. She says something very explicit like that, though. Then it's, make them stronger. Then it's fortify, all trying to frame them as a victim somehow, rather than going into a peace negotiation, knowing for a fact that all during this, what they're doing is building up military capability, meaning they have no interest in peace whatsoever, right? It would be like, let's say I'm in a beef with a coworker, right? And he and I decide that we are not going to, in order to squash the beef, right? We aren't going to go into the office on the same day. And I keep going into the office on that day, right? I mean, I don't really have an office, it's job sites, but you know what I mean. And so I just keep going into this, right? And we already know that if one of us is in the office where we agree not to be, it's going to come to blows, right? I just keep going in, though, and know that I'm going to keep going in order to get whatever I want accomplished while telling him I'm not. That would be how it is on a sort of singular basis. It's so, like, the way Vish is framing it is just wrong. And again, another lie. I don't know how many lies we're up to now, but it's got to be over 50.
Where's Russia here?
Thank you, Achaya. And yes, he absolutely
right.
would.
So the Minsk agreements were intended and framed as a peace agreement that was going to end conflict with Russia.
Where's
and
the
Merkel
invading?
is saying that Ukraine was building up military capacity.
Where's the thing about invading Russia, though?
There it is. Nobody said anything about invading Russia, right? And look how confused Eddie is. He's like, wait, who said anything about invading Russia?
Where I'm not sure if she explicitly said, I guess we're going to invade Russia, but that's kind of implied in the fact that the Minsk agreements, like I said, were framed as this is going to bring peace. This is going to bring peace between Ukraine and Russia. And then Merkel said, no, it was just a way for us to build up military capacity, meaning NATO military capacity.
Where does she say NATO?
So I guess I made a mistake in saying she said we're explicitly going to attack Russia. But
you notice right here where they are generally taken at face value as an offhandedly delivered admission of her duplicity, and by extension, the West's, in her dealings with Russia on the Ukraine question. Meaning, we say peace, we mean war.
But that's implied because, like I said, Russia had said multiple times, more NATO capacity in Ukraine is a threat to us, and that's a red line. And it's going to push us closer to nuclear war.
Where does she say NATO's military capacity? It looks like she's talking about the Minsk.
And here's another lie through language. Eddie never said NATO's military capacity. Why on earth would anyone be building up NATO's military capacity? Clearly, it is the state in question's military capacity. But he's going to use this to try to appear as if he's correct. What a sleazeball. This is really, and I hate to keep harping on this, this is all these spoiled little rich kids got. All they ever got.
Accords, giving Ukraine time to fortify, which, it didn't, because the separatists violated it like immediately. So it didn't even do that.
No, it wasn't the separatists who violated it immediately.
As so we where are we?
Guilt.
Okay, did you lie to me? I don't see, where's the mention of building up NATO troops or invading Russia? That was a pretty big thing. You predicated the entire legitimacy of Russia's act of purported self-defense.
Wait. Another lie? Amazing. You predicated the entire legitimacy of Russia's act of self-defense. When did he do that? That did not happen. Lie number 7,655. Thank you very much, Cameron. He says, as a blue-collar person, it's great to see Midwestern Marks school this fool. Keep advocating for our struggle, guys. Always.
On the idea that NATO has admitted that it has plans to build up troop capacities. And use Ukraine
and NATO was literally training troops, thousands of troops on
So you lied.
As he said originally, NATO is literally training thousands of troops. That's what he explained that in detail with Vish talking over him before, and now Vish is pretending to flip out and act like he's lying. Man, I would love for Vish to. I'd like to do a debate with him in person one day and see how he acts.
This doesn't
what
say that at
capacity-
all.
What military capacity did you fucking think that Merkel was talking about? It's
Ukraine.
Germany's a NATO member country. Obviously, she's referring to NATO's military
It's a
capacity
conflict
in Ukraine as they're
between
training NATO
Russia.
troops on Russia's border.
It's a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. She obviously
We
is saying,
all know it's more than that. We all
oh
know
my
it's a conflict
God, you're
between
deep.
We all know it's a conflict between NATO.
The conflict is between NATO and Russia and Ukraine and Ukraine. It's both at the same time. And here Vish is going to pretend that this is crazy, guys. Oh my God. I can't handle how deep you're in. You're such a conspiracy theorist.
NATO and
you're
Russia.
in deep.
So these days, I've been highly considering going to therapy for stress and
Okay, so you completely lied about this. You said that she said that they were going to invade Russia, and it doesn't even mention
Line number 6,942. You said that she said they're going to invade Russia.
NATO troop capacity, and the only evidence you have is that, well, read between the lines. Obviously, she means the Minsk Accords that were violated 8 seconds after they were passed would give NATO, the strongest military alliance on earth, the time to defend itself against Russia.
Again, Eddie never said this. He's going crazy on that.
Okay. Well, I can see why Russia rushed to invade Ukraine up the back of evidence like this. Clearly, they had no choice with the immeasurable threat levied at their doors.
Imagine if this was happening in Mexico.
Oh, hold on. I got a great question in the comments. Julie says, no, if someone in Vish's comments argued that they wanted to buy time for Ukraine because they anticipated that Russia would attack and that this indeed happened. What's a good argument against that? This is actually an argument that Vish himself tries to make. What it does is sort of gives you a topsy-turvy version of events. The entire reason Russia has any offensive posture here whatsoever is because NATO is messing around in Ukraine. No other reason for it. So if they really were anticipating a Russian attack and cared about Ukrainian people dying in it, they wouldn't have been in Ukraine. They would not have been training those soldiers. They would not have been, I mean, we could go on and on down the list, funding the Banderites, et cetera, doing the coup, blah, blah, blah. So that is the entire premise. Russia's primary concern is its national security. And it has moved its red line back since the Gorbachev era, when Gorbachev made his traitorous move, right? And NATO promised it would not move an inch past Germany. It's continually did that and continually encroached. And you got to think about, they can't mess around with their people being annihilated. There's already been one Western invasion literally trying to exterminate all of the Soviet people at that time, which is a lot more, but all of the Russian people. My grandpa fought against those Nazis. It's a very visceral thing to think about. You're in your home and there are people coming to exterminate you. And this is how it seems. It is an existential threat for the Russian state. So when they say something like that, talk about the only reason Russia attacked being that NATO was there, you know?
So if Wagner Group was training up troops right on the border of Mexico and the U.S., and then there was a peace agreement that said Mexico was going to demilitarize and we were going to have peace and Russia was not going to be involved in Mexico.
What?
And then 7 years later, we found out that Russia was continuing to train up troops in Mexico. And Russia said, guess what?
Wait.
We never planned to follow the peace agreement. We were just going to keep building up troops.
Wait, hold on. Wait.
Don't you think that would imply that they were building up troops to threaten, contain, or attack
No,
the U.S.?
there's no relationship
Right?
between the NATO troop training and what she's saying about the Minsk Accords. The reason she's saying
Yes, there is.
this about the Minsk Accords is because she didn't
She's
think
a
Russia would
NATO
follow
leader.
them.
As NATO is
No,
training
you
up
are
troops in
reaching
Russia,
so
and she's
hard.
saying we're
You were
going to
like,
build
yeah,
up
she
military
admitted she would have.
capacity.
She didn't think Russia would follow them. The reason Russia attacks is because of NATO's actions.
invade Russia, and
What
then I look
fucking
at this
military do you
article,
think
and
she's
you're like,
talking about if not NATO?
Ukraine's.
What military do you think she's talking about if not NATO?
The country that was in the war, Ukraine.
That was being trained up directly by NATO.
Yeah, that's not a secret,
Ukraine's
obviously.
Ukraine is essentially a puppet of the U.S. and NATO.
Wait, no, wait, don't.
See what Vish is doing again, and look how excited he is. He thinks he's got another gotcha. Yes. Achaya sent another super chat. Thank you, Achaya. Did you see the Florida travel warning against communists? Yes. We're going to be talking about this sometime in the very near future. I don't really have time for it now because this debate's already super long, but it's terrifying. And things are getting real. So I just want to say that the time for vicious is long past, and the time for organizing, educating yourself in Marxism, and getting disciplined is now.
Wait, don't run away from the point. You completely lied about this, man. I am so happy I asked you for this article. No, and now you're talking fast because you know that you were caught lying.
And you don't.
Talking fast because you know you were caught lying. This entire thing comes out of nowhere but Vish's mind.
No, you were caught lying.
Merkel was talking about building up NATO capacity.
Where in this article?
Capacity.
Wait, can you control?
Okay,
control that thing. Can you find it?
Who is she talking about if not NATO and
Ukraine? Listen to the quote. Listen to the quote. Okay, listen. I'm going to read it out loud, and we're going to see. Okay,
Again,
this is from their speech.
As if Eddie's
she believes she is Merkel. By the way. She believes that later during the Minsk talks, she was able to buy the time Ukraine. I spoke that one louder just so that it was clear. Needed to better fend off the Russian attack. She says it. This is also Ukraine, is now a strong, well-fortified country. Back then, she is certain it, that's Ukraine.
Get the relief you need now. Pay for it later. PayPal.
Johnson, why are you naked? Because my t-shirt sucks. Look at Gibson. He's wearing a true classic tee.
Would have been overrun by Putin's troops. Any reading of this that involves, we prompted bad faith peace talks so NATO could build troops it's incoherent to begin with because NATO can train outside of Ukraine, and we also don't need Ukraine as a staging ground. We have the Baltic states, 3 of them that hate Russia right there, and Alaska, I guess if we really wanted to Alaska, but no, clearly by this, she meant that and now Finland, we would need NATO to have more time?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to deny that NATO building up troop capacity right on Russia's border isn't an act of aggression because the U.S. also has NATO's troops stationed in the Baltic states. If you want to act like that, and if you want to act like a phony peace agreement that they admittedly said was just to allow them to continue building up their military in Ukraine, which Russia constantly said was a red line.
I'm sipping the
If you
Kool-Aid.
really want to act that naive and act like NATO wasn't threatening Russia with that,
you,
and like Merkel
you
wasn't
didn't remember
talking about
what this
building NATO
article said.
capacity,
If
you want to act like
again, this is more made up from Vish's mind, all based on him pretending Eddie said something he didn't. What a really weak dude, you know? I can't think of anything more weak and than not being able to actually address the substance of what someone is saying. You know what I mean? It's like it's just so cowardly and scummy.
The Western imperialist countries in NATO
was your memory of this article
building up Ukraine so they
the
can
Ukraine on
defend
Fire
themselves, the great
documentary?
liberal democracy of Ukraine.
Wait. Do they mention this in the Ukraine on Fire?
I don't think I'm going to get through to you if that's how naive.
Do they mention this in Ukraine on Fire?
If you don't think that NATO was building up capacity to threaten and contain Russia, I mean, try putting.
And here's another sort of sleazy little tactic: acting as if something that has good information in it is just absurd and silly, and look how above it I am. I'm gonna pretend like I gotta laugh. It's so funny. Oh. Very, 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 very weak rich kid here.
How many? I'm sorry. Wait. How many NATO? How many NATO troops did we have in total? Wait. Eddie, you're jibber jabbering. You're running away. You're running. You're gish galloping. But it's okay. We need to come back down to earth. How many NATO troops do you think?
That's not what a gish gallop is. And by the way, is it just me, or when people like sort of try to name our like logical fallacies in a debate, is it just weird?
Think we had in 2014 that you think Angela Merkel is saying the sole reason of a quote-unquote phony peace deal between a war that is exclusively being fought between Russia and Ukraine is actually a time for us, the largest military alliance on earth in history, to build up our forces. What do you
all of that was a lie, like literally all of it.
How many?
What do you think?
No,
we need 10,000 more ICBMs
in Ukraine. which until 1991 was part of the Soviet Union, so we weren't allowed there, right? I mean, we did.
Why
we
would
did
we? Why do we
underhandedly,
need Ukraine as a
but they were
staging
only-
ground? We have the Baltic states.
with Serbia as a buffer, also.
He thinks the other Baltic states are a staging. Vish, military expert, right?
Who's more pro-Russia, but I mean, because Ukraine is right on the border.
No,
There's if you
the
look at the map, there's no
Baltic,
better way to attack
no,
Russia
no,
than
not
through
Balkan,
Ukraine.
Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia.
Oh, sorry, got you. Those tiny. Ukraine is a much larger.
It's hundreds of miles of borders shared with Russia. Why do we don't need a shared border to stage a fight with Russia? We're both nuclear countries.
Russia through Estonia.
No, we don't want to
Estonian
attack
army
Russia. There's no plan to attack Russia.
Have NATO attack Russia.
There's
through
no plan to
Estonia and see
attack
how well that
Russia.
goes.
It was.
There is absolutely ongoing attacks against Russia. Every sanction is an attack. This, like, the brain of these sort of metaphysical minded, and I hate using the word metaphysical, I know, but that's how Marx uses it. So I kind of tend to. It's just so I can only see this like very specific, particular thing. And if it's not this particular thing, the general thing has no meaning. And so they continually just are not, they can't understand what's going on around them. I don't know if this part's a lie or not, or if his real feeling is that the U.S. is not currently attacking Russia or doesn't want to. But this is about opposed, sort of irreconcilable class interests of their ruling class and the globalized financial ruling class. There's no way for those interests to just sort of coincide and live together. One needs to be above the other and overtake the other. And now what this does is, who are the enemy of the American working classes? The proletariat and the reproletariat. It is this financialized capital, our own ruling class, right? So if you're genuinely against our ruling class, supposedly Vish is an anarchist and should be, right? Although, you know, who knows, anarchists are very eclectic and there's all types of them. But if he, you know, wants a better society in the US, you fight that ruling class, and continually siding with them against powerful enemies of theirs is just not a smart move.
Seriously,
nuclear
acting like you don't
annihilation.
understand the geopolitical significance of controlling
nuclear
Ukraine.
war?
Are
The
you really
only
gonna play
one who
dumb
talks
and
lightly
pretend that
about
you don't know the
nuclear war is
geopolitical
Russia.
significance?
And it's not lightly about nuclear war. Why does it have to go to nuclear war? That's crazy.
For the U.S. to control and NATO to control Ukraine.
No,
Are we going to be that?
Can you, okay, really
that
quickly, out of
naive?
curiosity, how would NATO stage an invasion of Russia without prompting global thermonuclear war?
I don't know. That's why
Oh.
it's so
Oh,
disgusting.
whoops,
to
that's
be,
why
no,
your butt's that way. Hold on.
It would.
He's not going to stop.
That is why they use a proxy. That is why we call it a proxy war. Vish has got them sort of on this track where he's led it into this circle where you can't get out of his particularity. It's just another sleazy move.
Because Russia says if there's an
There you go.
existential threat to the Russian state, they're going to use nukes.
Okay,
it
so-
would push us towards nuclear war.
Okay,
and
so wait.
apparently the
And it
people in
does
charge of our
push us
government
towards
still don't
nuclear
care.
Quick
war.
because they
follow-up.
continue
Quick-
to-
hey,
they
quick
continue
follow-up.
to sanction. They continue to
Quick
dump
follow-up,
weapons.
Eddie.
The Russians
Okay,
aren't
so
stupid.
if you don't know a way that we would do war with Russia without ending Western capitalism in nuclear,
Not we, the American ruling class. So I guess we with Vish, yeah.
fire, why would we do it?
I don't know. The people who run our government and run NATO are sadistic. They're doing it right now.
Because
dude.
they're,
doing
oh
it
my
right
God,
now.
nothing. Your conspiracy theory doesn't even have a
You're
narrative.
saying that
9/11
you're saying that
conspiracy
the
theorists
fact
have
that
better
this might
narratives than
escalate
this.
us to nuclear war.
Yeah,
proves that the
yeah.
Western-
They
the
needed a
Western powers wouldn't
4-second
do it.
peace deal
They'll
to
do
build up
anything to
troops.
protect
We only
imperialism.
had 4 billion trillion troops and all the military
All of this built on Vish's lies. Congratulations, Vish. Excellent lies.
might in the world, but we needed 5 extra seconds to defend against ourselves so we could build up against Russia. And we already had the Baltic states, but we needed Ukraine
you're
as
saying
well.
the US
And our
is just
plan
so
for doing
powerful
this
they could-
was to give a 4-second Minsk
We're
agreement.
ignoring the geopolitical significance of Ukraine.
Wait, guys, if
You
we
can
could
laugh
just
all you
oust
want.
Yanukovych.
You think he's really laughing? I can't tell. It's like it's all performance. It's so weak, and I don't know.
so we can finish our Star Wars anti-ICBM nuclear laser
Look how
beam.
superior.
Yeah, no. Well, listen, I'll tell you, man. I didn't know I was arguing against
attacking Russia through Latvia.
I didn't realize I was arguing with a NATO fan. You have more faith in NATO than I do.
Significance of the country of Ukraine.
You're like the biggest NATO fan I've ever talked to. You're like, yeah, NATO is actually capable of amassing the military might in order to single-handedly defeat Russia. And that's why they had no choice but to defend themselves by invading Ukraine and crippling their economy doing it, leaving open Finland to the Baltic states and also the rest of the world. And also ICBMs don't need a shared border. Okay, no. It's fine.
Yeah.
So how's your day been?
Gotta be. So this is kind of just more sleaziness, more
I talked about
lies.
Tears of the Kingdom,
It's
right?
the same thing. It's just a performance.
Tears of the Kingdom.
It's always funny to me that
how to kill
they
all
hide,
mosquitoes
right,
in the area in 90 seconds.
the internet or
This
whatever
simple
else.
but brilliant trick you can do to
Daddy's
Did you
money,
figure out your
et
stuffy
cetera,
nose,
et
did you?
cetera.
Did you get some neti pot going?
No, I don't own a neti pot. It feels like it'd be
You
so
gotta
cringe to
invest
use
in
it.
one.
Yeah, like a cute porcelain one, like my grandma used to have.
Yeah, they're legit. They work. They
What?
do.
Why can't we all just get along? Is my question.
We can't get along because of people like
we got to debate these important issues. Like we said, NATO and the U.S. are pushing us towards World War III and a global conflict with Russia. So we got to tease these things out, even if we have disagreements on them.
Eddie is absolutely right, and clearly the bigger man here, right? Even if we have right after Vish is making this big performance and playing pretend and lying, etc., and he's like, look, if we have disagreements, we still got to have these debates. We got to have these conversations because World War is a big deal. People are dying right now. Even here at home, our standard of living is getting worse and worse because of this. And then these cheerleaders for imperialism and finance capital like Vish do this. It's just disgusting.
It's very important.
I actually think they're stopping World War III.
How is that?
You want me to answer sincerely, or do you want me to take the same disaffected, I'm pretending I don't know as much as I do tone that I have for the entire conversation?
Oh, that's very, very cutting. Well done. Good wit.
Just your real argument or your real opinion.
I don't think that Putin is a rational actor. For the most part, I think leaders tend to be.
Okay, so let's prove that. Is Putin rational? Go ahead, Vish. Tell us your secret magic Jedi mind trick that there is no rationality behind Vladimir Putin, right? I guess the KGB just trains people to have irrationality. The Russian people have no idea what they're doing. They're like, hey, this crazy guy, we like him. He'll be our leader. Come on, man. It's ridiculous. If that's what you base all of these later arguments on, Putin being irrational, you're just pathetic. It means you have no real reason. And again, makes you just look weak for all the avoiding of substance.
I think North Korea, you could say, rationally acted. I think that their strategy of provoking conflict unnecessarily is
not something North Korea does. Another lie built into that. Imagine
an
that.
effective deterrent to regional conflict. I don't think Putin is, though. He is an authoritarian leader. He is, after all, pretty much singly in control of the country.
Pretty much singly in control of the country. If he had to prove any of these things, you can look up Russia's constitution right now, by the way. You can look up all the governmental bodies. You can look up the different levels of government they have. Guarantee you, Vish will not be able to prove that Putin controls it all and has final say on everything. It's absolutely absurd. No leader in the history of leaders has done that.
And he doesn't come across as a very stable person to me. Smart, but not stable. A lot of machismo going on in that guy's brain.
So what is stable?
I don't know if the rumors say his cancer is dying. I don't know if that's true at all. But I think
it's not true.
Well, I mean, we don't know. I don't think they're true, but
true. I guess I don't know.
I think that authoritarian leaders just have a tendency to get expansionist and militaristic.
This is called a dogma. There is no reason for it, so that's just how it is. They're authoritarian, so they just like to be expansionistic.
made blood and soil arguments when he gave his televised speech regarding the invasion of Ukraine in the 3-day.
His televised speech was not blood and soil. It was nationalistic. Don't get me wrong. Putin is a nationalist. Absolutely. And he is not a communist. And even when he was in the Communist Party, became Yeltsin's kind of boy. But nowhere near a sort of ethnic supremacist or anything like that.
A special military operation began. I think that he needs to be ousted. I think he's a threat to the world. I think that under him, the Kremlin has escalated its constant threats of nuclear conflict, even before the war with Ukraine. And that the only thing that we can do right now is provoke conditions that lead to him being ousted so that
So all of this is just an excuse to agree with our ruling class and want regime change in a country they have nothing to do with, that they continually attack, continually try to undermine, etc. What an anarchist. Go buy some Bitcoin like other anarchists. What are you doing?
a more sane, probably still bad, but still more sane oligarch in Russia can take power. I mean, hopefully they can have a democracy again. I think that'd be great, you know, like a transformative thing, but realistically, even a better oligarch. And him humiliating himself with this conflict in Ukraine, I think is our best bet. I think if we didn't help Ukraine, if we let them just wash over Ukraine, which he would have if there was no help given to Ukraine, that he would just be up against even more NATO countries and things would just escalate and escalate because he's not a rational actor and he would provoke and provoke. And that, I think, that's like the real World War III threat. So my hope...
You know, he mentioned circular logic earlier, right? This premise of Russia provoking is based on the premise that Russia is the one provoking. He's assumed his premise within his conclusion. It makes no sense if Russia is not provoking, like what is actually happening in the real world. And I think we pretty well explained throughout the course of this debate dissection that his entire reason falls apart, right? And his reason for wanting regime change in Russia is, if I had to guess, I mean, I can't read minds, I'm not Vish, I would say a Western chauvinism. The notion that him and the ruling class that he is so close to and supports so well have a moral right to overthrow sovereign countries with nothing to do with this one. I would guess that his notion of the Russian people is of, you know, Putin oppressing them, just like of his notions of China and everywhere else who don't have his enlightened Western liberal values, right? It is extreme Western chauvinism, and it's not based in reality. There's a reason our country is crumbling, and if this guy genuinely cared about a fight for a better society like he pretends to, he will be taking the millions that he has or whatever he has and funding a revolution. But does he? No.
Hope is that he gets ousted before then, and then we can all live in peace. Apart from that, I don't give a shit. I don't care if Russia has its own economic hegemon. I don't care if they keep the Kazakhstan in the stands and the Belarus or whatever. I don't, you know, like their business is theirs, they're their own country. But in this specific respect, like this degree of bloodthirsty imperialism, I think this needs to be.
Also uses the word imperialism wrong, but that's okay. All of it, again, based on, I think Putin's crazy, which is the dumbest thing ever.
Be held down. And I think this is the best way of doing it.
Whatever your business needs, Vistaprint can print it. Like packaging from tape to thank you cards, or merch from
I think if you use the word authoritarian abstractly like that, and this is a huge, you know, propaganda tool of the State Department when they're trying to overthrow a country, you could pretty much justify the overthrow of any leader. Right, just say that they're authoritarian and they're not a rational actor and they need to be ousted. And then I think you're underestimating the strategy of Putin. I think he is in a conflict with all of the NATO countries, like you mentioned, because all of the NATO countries are funneling money and arms into this conflict now, which I think NATO sees as an existential conflict with Russia, and Russia sees it the same way. So by doing that, the NATO countries are already running out of arms and weapons. So Russia is achieving what one of their main goals of the special military operation has always been, which is the demilitarization of not only Ukraine, but also the whole of NATO and the entirety of the West. They're basically...
All right, he's just going to lie and pretend that he's saying something. He isn't. He's going to take it to an absolute. Perfect example of the purity fetish, by the way, but that's okay. So I think we're pretty much done. The debate's going to wrap up. I really don't have any interest in looking at this guy's face anymore. And we've been going on for over 2.5 hours now, which is by far the longest I've ever done this on my own. So yeah, we're gonna call it a day, I think. And let's see, I'll stop sharing my screen here. And I just want to say this is a really horrible time in history. At the same time, it's a very exciting time because people are seeing through people like Vaush. More and more working class people are forced to realize that things are getting serious and we need to be serious ourselves. That kind of weakness just is readily apparent to us. And I want to I forget where I was going. It's been a long video, obviously, so I apologize. But anyway, thank you everyone for being with me and making my first full stream on my own go so well. Every Tuesday we have our Basics of Marxism course. That the first one was yesterday. It went fantastic. We have an awesome group of people from all over the working classes and all over the world getting together to learn what it takes to do what is necessary to literally save society. And I wish I were being hyperbolic there. I know it sounds a little corny, but that's what it is, right? We need to overthrow this ruling class, and we do it together, and we do it by exposing these sort of imperialist mouthpieces like Vaush. So with that note, I'll play us out with our intro video, and everybody have a great rest of their day.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.